Okay, this is episode 27 of Oversight. Something, discussion show, Overwatch. Hello, me, Thorin, small banter with Monty, possibly reference other things, play off each other, reference things for at least 3 to 4 minutes. Guest sits there thinking, do I ever get mentioned at any point in time? Sometimes, as a bonus, we just start addressing the guest without even introducing who they are. So I'll actually, Monty, short-circuit my own short-circuit of my own show that I short-circuit with you by introducing our guest. And our guest is Huck, obviously Chris Loranger, best known for his time. Whatever, I'm not French. I'm not trying to be French either.
He's not French either.
Exactly.
It's fine. He's pretend French.
Yeah, I say it the way probably some members of your family say it, but without being French. So,
Loranger.
obviously famed for his time as a StarCraft 2 player, but now he's stepped up to the big boy table. He's actually general manager. What's your actual official term in is
President
that operations
of gaming.
or something?
No,
Is that
it's
it?
president of gaming. So that's why we always refer to
bad.
him as Mr. President and salute him when he comes around.
Okay. President of gaming.
That is the proper way to address Huck now. Is whenever you see him, you salute and say, "Hello, Mr. President."
It's the only way he'll ever be president. You have to understand, Monty, because they don't have presidents in America and Canada.
He
Obviously.
loves it. He loves it. Secretly at his core, this is the respect and admiration that he's always wanted.
I needed. There's a requirement for the job. I needed this title.
Right, Huck, when you were a player, some people, to malign you would try to imply you were something of a diva. In fact, I'm sure you're very well aware of this, there was that documentary on Canadian television where within it, even though it was about you and your team and you weren't winning a championship, they did put like a solid 20 minutes in there trying to imply you were a diva, like having people pick your laundry up or whatever. Like, this was already something in the background, right? Well, now that you're with this team, I'm sure you're well aware of this because you've been playing up to it yourself. People have tried to build this image within the team that you are like the Bill Belichick of the Overwatch side.
What do you mean people within the team? He literally tweeted a
Yeah,
picture
Monty,
of
I was sort of soft selling it. It's obviously him building the whole thing, isn't it? That's what I'm saying.
I'm just owning up to it. I didn't build it up. I'm just owning the image, right?
Okay.
I love it.
The documentary was really weird actually because I did not know that it was going to be like that, right? So they shot probably I want to say at least 5-6 hours of camera work, right? And then you only get maybe 10, 20 minutes on the grand scheme of things. And I went back to Canada for a short break and I got all my family together. So aunts, uncles, cousins. We went over to my aunt's house in the basement. We're all watching it, and everyone's quiet. They're paying attention.
And remember, Monty, this is a documentary about a tournament he won over Koreans.
Yeah.
So he's probably thinking this is going to be amazing. Yeah,
was this MLG Orlando or?
Well, it's over a long period of time, months.
Okay.
Yeah, but I was the only EG player that won an event during that period of time. Yeah. So they that was the focal point.
But anyway.
But Cody Connors, he was the manager at the time, and he breaks down in tears because I'm that hard to handle. Basically, on camera in the documentary, it's implied he picked up a drinking problem. It's really bad, right? So we finished the documentary. And one of my cousin basically is just sitting there, and at the end, and everybody's kind of a little bit quiet, and then he's kind of come off like an asshole, kind of come off like a douche in that documentary, Chris. And I'm like, it's not that bad, trust me. And I was really after that, it was a learning experience. I was very careful I try to be more careful about what I said on camera and what I didn't, because if somebody gets enough footage of you, it's very easy to tell a tale, whatever they want to tell. So
that's I love it. I mean, so Cody Connors currently works for Twitch and is a sweetheart. So that is
yes.
I haven't seen this, by the way. I have not seen this documentary you're talking about.
And here's the thing, Monty.
Now I must see it. I'm so excited now.
Here's the key detail, Monty. He still works for Twitch, which means he actually does something in his job. He's not just some legacy hire from 3 years ago who was living off being esports in 10 years.
Most of those people were professional tweeters, at the time.
Exactly. Well, now they've got a lot of time free to just go full time for that. So
it's all right. They don't need money actually because of that buyout. So I think
the question is though,
A-okay.
Like I implied though, if anyone knows that history, people now basically are wondering In fact, actually, this was leveled against you as a criticism again when the Boston Uprising's lineup was leaked, because obviously we all found out what all these lineups were going to be before they were made official. Like it was pretty well out there. As I think people have now learned in the Overwatch League, there's not really a lot of guarded information. People tend to get on Discords, and they're unaware Discords are actually on the internet. They think that's like a private internet that no one else can access. But apparently, when he says something on a Discord, believe it or not, that just gets out there to everyone. So
yeah, and weirdly enough, when you are on a Discord that's run by Slasher himself, he will tend to tweet things that happen on that Discord. Really strange situation that most people don't seem to understand.
Nope.
But if you remember, Huck, when the lineup was first announced, playing on this theme, a lot of people were mad about it, actually. A lot of people thought the Boston Uprising is some sort of vanity project for you and that you've really overreached by getting all these names. Okay, some of them had some potential, but even people who claimed that, like, no, I knew that guy would always be good. Beyond the Koreans, it was still a gamble, some of these names. There's definitely bigger Western names you could sign if you had any size checkbook, etc. To what degree is there some truth to this? Is there a grain of truth? Like, how much have you directly been involved with setting up the way the Boston Uprising is, even down to the players?
I mean, I was very involved. Basically, the craft group went through a lot of interviews. I think I was the last one. They called me up. They had been looking at the scene for a while. I, flew in for an interview, I think a day or two later after they called me. And then I had a great interview in person at Gillette Stadium, which was like obviously a really big step. And then we closed the deal shortly after. And I think they were one of the first people to buy in from the traditional sports side, but they were one of the last people to kind of get that set up, right? And they're kind of behind the curve because they didn't have a team previously in Overwatch. So there was a lot of work to be done. I think the first step I flew to Korea under the pretense that I was going to Apex. And then, I looked around Korea.
In the thinly veiled pretext that you were going to APEC. That was hilarious, by the way. You're like, I'm back in Korea. Everybody's like, I wonder why Huck's in Korea right now. So strange.
Yep. So, I got a sense of where the scene was. It was nice because a lot of the owners of teams in Overwatch actually come from like StarCraft 1. So I actually, had decent relationships with a lot of them, or at least like a friend of a friend. And then we started the process, right? I looked at the scene, looked at, what people were asking, how much things cost buyout-wise, what people were asking salary-wise. And I kind of always had this theory that, some of the best players were still undiscovered. And a lot of Overwatch to that date was kind of still clicky and still like who you knew, and it was based off of who people played together in Team Fortress 2 or those previous games. So I didn't just like see that and say like, okay, I'm just gonna pick a bunch of people I believe in. We had a very thorough tryout process, and I actually it was me and somebody we hired on a short-term basis to help manage scrims and schedules, but I tried out the staff and the players at the same time. So what we would do is we'd get a 6v6 in-house, or we'd go up against an established team, and we would just cycle through people, and we'd see maybe 4 or 5 hours of any given person, and then they would basically move on to a stage 2, and then we would vet even more, and then they'd get to the third stage, and we had some analytics on the side that we ran, and I picked my staff before I finalized the players, but based on the strengths of the staff and what they saw and what kind of insights they had, feel like we picked pretty good people. So I was very involved. Everyone that was picked for the team, whether staff or players, was handpicked by me. Obviously, once the staff were selected, they weighed in heavily on who actually made the team. But overall, there were some nervous moments for me. All the criticism. There were even times where, we were looking at some star players, some bigger profile players that were close with some of the people we picked up, and it always comes to your mind like, should I pick this guy up just to be safe, to save a little face, right? Because if you pick up somebody like, let's Surefour, who's doing well in Overwatch League, but obviously was considered the best Western DPS maybe at the time.
Sure.
You pick that guy up. If your team doesn't work out, you kind of save a little face, right? You're like,
Yes.
we had this established guy. We did pick up an established guy. But at the end of the day, I was, paid to do a job, and I felt like even though there was some risk, that I strongly believe that the players we picked up were doing really well. And you got to kind of just go with it. If you see an opportunity and you think it's going to work out, you got to be willing to take that risk. And I've never been, scared to kind of face the public criticism.
Well, I think you've been more than vindicated at this point in time as well. So when you're talking about your staff, let's break this down because people may not know who your staff was. So you said, I picked my staff first before the players. So do you want to describe what the staff is and what the structure of the Boston Uprising is?
Sure. So our head coach is Krusty. He was a very established Korean coach at the time in Contenders. I think the farthest that his team had gotten was semifinals in Apex, and that was right before we actually signed him while he was still finishing their run in Apex. So every time he got a little bit further, we were pretty happy that he was vindicated a little bit more too with that pickup. He was known for, I would say, taking teams that were more unknown, like tier 3, tier 4 teams, and bringing them up to like the tier 2, maybe tier 1 teams. But he never really made it, I guess, to the highest level of Apex, and he had,
Well, he was the coach of NC Foxes, just so people know.
Yes.
So yeah, when you say he reached top 4 in Apex, that was the season that GC Busan won. So he was top 4 in that.
But we signed him right before that run. So up until that run, and then obviously when he got further, we were very happy with his performance. And he had a decent, level of English, which is always a priority. We never wanted to end up in this situation. Like, I look at LA Valiant and I think their coach is great, but I always think it's a big hassle to every line of communication to staff or players, you got to go through a translator and back to this person, and it's just a pain. So we picked him up. He was a very smart guy. He was very good with working. Obviously we were going to have some Korean players, so it made sense to pick him up. Then we picked up Shake, who was a flex support player in Overwatch, one of the better flex support players. I think a lot of people joked on Reddit that he was our best player, was our assistant coach, was the joke when the roster got announced.
Right.
And we were looking at him as a player too, to be honest with you, but he kind of, we had a serious conversation. He really wanted to make this transition. He's a diehard Pats fan too. So it kind of, all worked out, and I really liked his insight. He had been through college, even though he dropped out. He had a little bit more of a professional background to him, whether it was like articulating information, taking notes, how thorough he was with VODs, expressing his opinion, those kinds of things, and that was something I valued. Then next it would be Mini, who had some pro player experience on main tank for a couple of orgs, and then he ended up at a coaching position, I believe, for Tempo Storm. He was different. So all the staff kind of don't overlap in like their particular skill set. So Mini's kind of like the no guy. He is the guy. He's French. He will challenge everything. He'll always debate something. He doesn't give up. He's very specific and nitpicky about things, which is great. So I looked at him and I said, you know what? I don't want a group of guys that is always going to, always agree on everything. I want someone that's going to challenge ideas, kind of question everything, make sure that we're systematically just reevaluating constantly. And Mini was kind of that guy. And then last, I picked up Mr. Bleeple, Mo, who was a Toronto local. I met at a small local LAN. He played for the University of Toronto, actually. And he had gone to school in, relevant fields where he'd be a good analyst.
Because that guy's like a teenager, right?
Yeah, he's young. I think he's 19. But he was, pretty smart. He had showed me some of the work he had done as an analyst. I talked to him about what I saw his job being and some of the analytical work that he could be doing for us. We went over the tryouts, discussed, like what he saw from it. And then we were working with Winston's lab at the time as well, kind of go over those stats, and just a lot of the questions, I guess, in the process was less like, who do you think is good and what do they do well, and more like, why do you think this guy is good? Why do you think this stat is relevant? Why do you think it's important that this guy is the shot caller? Whatever it might be. So it's a lot of work. But at the end of the day, obviously, like you said, we're very happy with where we're at. And since then, we've kind of progressed, I would say, with like whose role and what they work on a day-to-day basis over time. But things have been going well.
Right, Monty, obviously you have inadvertently picked the best possible week to have Huck on, because not only was his team undefeated anyway, but now they've obviously done the double and beat 2 Korean teams.
They've beaten all 3. They've beaten all 3. They've beaten Seoul, New York, and London at all this stage, but yes.
But if you look, because of the last win they got, in the overall standings for Overwatch, they are actually second behind only New York now. They are now ahead of both London and Seoul Dynasty. So, obviously, pretty good week to have Huck on. Right? What would you say, Monty? What is Boston Uprising? What are their strengths at the moment? Why are they in such a great position for a non-Korean team?
Well, I guess like from the outside. So at the start of things, obviously, like a lot of people were saying, "Oh, this roster is a laughing stock." I thought they would do better than most people because I was familiar with their Korean players and I knew that they were good players on bad teams. So, especially Gamsu, I thought was really underrated generally. So it seemed to me that they were recruiting. They said they were recruiting for coachability, but also. I knew they were picking through a lot of teams and they were intelligently selecting good players. I was familiar with Mistakes, obviously, from 123. I was familiar with Dream Casper from his time, mostly as like a Pharah player. So I saw there were like high upsides to a lot of these players that they were selecting, but obviously I couldn't have known that they would be this good. I don't think that was a reasonable expectation. I think Huck would also agree that this is a somewhat surprising result. I'm sure you would like to pat yourself on the back as well, but even you could not have thought you would be in second place right now. That was entirely unreasonable and unpredictable.
I would say, I think the standings are really close, right? You look at like second to 8th, it's like a couple games, maybe 3 games. So I think it's possible we would be in this position, but if you would have said like second would be more like what New York's scoreboard is, I would say, we would have hoped to be, like a top 4 team, playoff team, and then hopefully be the best team by the end of the year to compete for the championship. So happy we're second, but second at this point, it's kind of, overrated a little bit.
Sure, but I think that the general consensus would be that if you guys made playoffs, that would be a massive improvement, massive like result for you. And you're not only probably going to make playoffs at this point, but you're going to make playoffs as a high seed, which is just like crazy. So
even when you say that though, Huck, even when you say that it's overrated, like I actually think if you ask most people's expectations, they would have expected something similar to what we had, which was that the top 3 Korean teams, they were all top of the standings overall. And the only real way they ever got challenged was every stage there would be one team that looked really good out of the non-Koreans who had a shot at it. And then it was just a different team next stage. And so I think no one would have put you top 3.
It's hard to measure with all the things, like it's hard to know because you hear about issues from other teams, you hear certain players that are being difficult or what their team culture is, and I'm not even sure to what degree do we attribute success to as diamonds in the rough or our coaching staff or our team culture, but for me it's not very surprising that we're this high ranked. It's more of that we're happy that the process and the plan worked out, right? Because from our standpoint, even preseason, we played against contenders team. We played against our contenders team now in Toronto Esports, and we were losing more games than we were winning. But we took a very thoughtful approach to everything we did. Even now, we everything we do, we think about a lot. So even preseason, we had a lot of issues. But for example, we came to a group discussion, and I made the decision to not overcoach the players preseason because it's a really hard thing to do when everyone's not in person. right? And then with players, I think a lot of teams let players coach themselves to a certain degree, and staff are kind of there to manage that conversation. And I think just the holistic approach that we've taken and how we manage the players and how we have more of a top-down system, we've mitigated a lot of underlying factors that teams have, right? I think like the most stereotypical cliche one you could point out is Dallas Fuel and all their issues, and how that team skill-wise is a good team. Maybe they're not a top 3 team, but they're a good team and they should be doing a lot better than what they did. But when you don't take a lot of things into consideration and you let it get out of hand, it kind of have a snowball effect, right? Ours is, a snowball effect that's going up. Theirs is one that's going down. But I don't think it was hard for us to imagine to be doing this good. I think given things that have happened this season, we were very pleasantly surprised how well we've been doing lately. But I think we just did things better in a more professional way.
I mean, I definitely agree with that, and I think we can tie this back to your own documentary experience that we were chatting about at the start of the show, which is that you guys are very much a black box. So you don't have your absolute transparency, Valiant shit show going on. Like, you don't have everybody tweeting like the Dallas Fuel or referencing stuff on stream. I personally, as a former team owner, definitely believe in the top-down philosophy as the best way to run teams, so that you have a strict sense of who is in charge of what, who is the authority. I think it really helps to keep these players in line who are often quite young. So what has been your take on, first off, your own team, and what is the philosophy surrounding how you guys interact with the media? Because you guys have done very well, but you stay very quiet. And also, what do you think about the other teams and their sort of media strategies and what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that in general, we haven't had too many players creating, controversy through Twitter. I think. I mean,
you had the unfortunate situation.
Well, once that we could handle
outside of your control, yes, right? Yes. Entirely outside of your control.
The
something
things
happened
that we can handle. Yes.
Yeah.
So that is the good side. Obviously, even when that incident happened with Dream, we tried to handle it as professionally as we could, right? And I'm very proud of.
You did a good job.
Boston Uprising as a whole did a great job with that. But we just, we want our team to be our team. The biggest thing that I can think of is we got a lot of crap at the beginning of the season when we didn't want to do those professional pugs, right? Where all the teams were like kind of scrimming and doing pickup games. And that was a conscious decision. I think at the time people were saying that we had tests and studies and stuff like that, which was more of players walking into the player lounge and seeing us doing interviews with the players and trying to get their perspective, things like that, more than us testing them. But we're always very, very conscious about like, where's our team at right now, mentally, culturally, attitude-wise, compared to other teams, and how are those interactions going? So at the time, our team, kind of the locker room environment was, we were like kind of the underdogs and we were doing pretty good at scrims, and we didn't want to contaminate them with the toxicity that come from other teams. The banter to like a very light degree, which is just friendly, good times, but to an extreme degree of a lot of teams talking trash or like players trying to one up each other. You know how it is with pro players. They always, even if they dominate someone in one match, they instantly try to get into their head and talk trash a little bit, and we didn't want that. So we've just always been kind of our own organization. Our players, I think, are very close with each other. They're not as close or open with other teams, even compared to how maybe some other teams interact with the other teams that are living in their apartment buildings or hanging out. But in general, we've just always been the outsider, since day one. We were the underdogs. People didn't give us respect. That kind of helped us. And we've just been conscious about how we build that team culture. And, our messaging to the players is, we explain situations on how they are. If you talk about these controversial topics on Twitter, or you engage with this person, this is probably what's going to happen, or there's a possibility. There's, no upside to tweeting something that's extremely controversial that's only going to bring you harm, right? If you really want to make a statement about a particular issue, whatever it might be, at least run it through us and let's figure out, how we can word it or protect you in ways that you need to. And to be honest, our guys are just kind of, they want to keep their heads down, they want to work hard, and they want to, do the talking in game through their play. And that's how we kind of always handled things and how we've looked at things.
What do you think about the other teams and the way that they're managing their media?
I would love, for example, our social media account to be a little bit more edgy, a little bit more bantery with other teams.
So why is this so interesting coming from you? And like this may be like you with age and wisdom and experience is like you're a famous trash talker. So for your team to be so quiet is somewhat an anomaly, right?
Yeah, and I think that comes back to, obviously we're a very corporate company at heart. When you go back to, the Kraft Group, and all the people that work on that side. So we're getting there, and they're warming up. And I even see it on, when I look at the Revs or the Patriots Twitters, they're starting to get more lively and doing more, younger demographic type of interactions and engagement. But in general, I don't think we're necessarily afraid of doing those kinds of things. Like when I look at Inside Valiant's episodes, that's some of the content that I love to watch, right? Because I get as much information from that as anything else, because I look at how they talk to each other, and I'm sure you
do like that.
Yeah, I love it.
The question is that smart for the Valiant to release?
Obviously, I think they see that the way they did the Agilities conversation, that's not good, and that's never a good look, and I'm sure they realize that as well. I think all teams have those conversations. Does the public necessarily need to see that? I don't think so, right? I think you could easily have...
No, they don't.
Noah could do his Noah Notes thing afterwards and say, like, we had a very serious conversation with Agilities. You flip to Agilities. Agility talks about the conversation. But do you need that actual conversation? No. But I like the content. I think it's good. Would we do something like that? I think we could eventually. But I'm a lot more careful about that kind of stuff, right? And almost all the content that we do release, I vet. So I'll look it over and say, like, okay, this can't be in there. We need to cut this. It's, competitive integrity, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's good. I think people can keep doing it. They just gotta vet it and really think about, like, when someone sees this, what's gonna be the interaction there, publicly.
Sure. I mean, there's also the problem, as he's saying here, Monty, like, it's not, like, if it was just the case that the easy approach is just don't put any of this content out, then Huck was killing it. Just keep winning the games in the league and don't put any content out. The problem is, you will not have the most popular players in the league if you do that. So if you want to build up the other side, which in the long run is what will make you all the money, obviously, you've got to kind of play that game, right? So that's what's tough. People are trying bold strategies. Like, here's the thing, if LA Valiant was the best team and they were doing this would probably be the hottest content you could have. Everyone would be loving to see what's going on behind the scenes, how they get a player, and that would be like groundbreaking stuff. Their problem is they're too borderline even as a team, so if they have problems, then it's easy to attach that to it as well, I think.
Well, I also think that within the Boston's case, if the other first off, okay, so they only have the budget for like Windows Movie Maker productions anyway, so we're not going to pretend like they actually have a budget to create content, because that's been proven demonstrably false. But even beyond that, I think that it seems like you guys have chosen to be quiet, foster a culture that is focused on winning and the top-down coaching structure. And I think the idea here is you get famous and popular based on your results. And certainly it seems from the outside that there's a lot of like viewing parties that you guys have in Boston. It seems like your popularity is doing just fine in your region.
Yes, I would say some of those things. I think we've done a lot better with content from the first roster reveal video that we did, and we're going to continue to.
Which was truly awful. How did that happen?
It just happened. Things happen, Monty. But I mean, it's different for us, right? You look at Valiant and Immortals; they have Immortals on that side, right? So they already have those people in place. We we started from nothing, right? There was no one in place. I was hired, and we kind of went from there. So this is something we're building out, but we're not, Cloud9. We don't have, all that support and help. We're not Valiant. We're not Immortals. And there's certain teams that obviously weren't endemic that came in and are willing to spend more money. We're willing to spend money, but it has to kind of, add up long term, right? And we're not in market. We're not LA Gladiators either, where, they're pretty much in market almost. So yes, we have a lot of support at home. Once we do end up at home, we're definitely going to ramp up more, and even up until then, we're planning on doing more. But we want to make sure that when we hire someone or we release something or how we build that strategy, it makes sense for us long term. But yes, of course, it always helps when you're winning, right? Even internally, everyone's going to have difficult players and everyone's going to have issues, and you just kind of have to realize that and address it as it comes. But the biggest thing is when you are doing well, try to address those issues, as they come and as much as you can while you're winning, because I think a lot of teams, we kind of all go through these up and downs and these waves, and I think a lot of other staff kind of ride the highs and don't necessarily, keep grinding it out, keep addressing issues, keep reevaluating things, and it's just kind of like you said, the work culture that we have here, holistically, staff, me, players, everyone works really, really hard, and that's something we're very proud of, and obviously it's resulted in a second place, at least currently.
Before we go on to more recent things, I have a question before we forget, which I need to ask you, which is, why was Gamsu just not in the team for some indiscriminate amount of time with no real reason ever given? And then you lost a bunch of games, then he came back, and now you're winning again. Could we just have some basic transparency on that, please?
Well, I think I can't remember. Did we go I think we went 1-1.
Okay.
When he wasn't here, I don't think it was like we lost.
Why was he randomly in Korea? Why are you giving him a break?
Maybe he started an Overwatch
the explanation
franchise.
was so weird for this. It was we didn't take a break over Christmas, so Gamsu needed to go back to Korea to have a break now.
Yes. So
which doesn't make any fucking sense. So please explain.
So we on that, the last note, we work really hard. We didn't really give room for our players to go back to Korea and kind of reset. It's very hard to be a non-native person, especially from a very different culture. It's one thing to come from Europe and live here. It's another thing to come from Korea and live here, as someone that, has done the reverse. And between the stages, you have that 1 week break. And you obviously want to leg up on the competition, and you want to adapt to the new meta, the new patch, everything new. In between stage 1 and stage 2, we did not allow our players to go back. Right, we gave them like 1 or 2 days off, and then we were back to work. And that was something we always, wished that we could have changed, because it did not work out. When we looked at the team, and this is kind of similar thought, that we always look at things and we reevaluate and reassess. We saw that our Korean players in particular were having a tougher time with kind of grinding it out on a day-to-day basis, right? And Gamsu, not like the other players, doesn't have that replacement, right? So we can't sub someone else in and say like, all right, guys, do your best today. We don't have, our starter, but we still need to practice, right? Everyone else has that option. Gamsu never had that option. So when he started to get burnt out, realistically, he had to go back to Korea. He had to take some time for himself. And that's why he went back, right?
I mean, but this doesn't make any sense, because it's also Gamsu that this happened to when he's a seasoned professional gamer from League of Legends. Mm-hmm. He's played in North America. He's played in Europe. He's used to these longer seasons. Like if you had told me that this was Kalios's issue, because a lot of, I think, the burnout that happens right now in Overwatch League is because the players are not used to this schedule. But surely Gamsu, the fucking League of Legends player who has been through this cycle time and time again, should be the one that is most acclimated to the grind, right?
Yes, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have issues, right? And I don't think it's exactly the same, right? Overwatch League schedule is very different. You're playing, I would say, an arguably harder schedule than League. maybe it's different. It depends on like their practice regime and everything like that. But there are issues with players getting burnt out for sure. And he didn't have, he can't take a day off, right? All those other players, they can take days off on our team. So if he comes in and Gemsu's like, Huck, I'm really burnt out. I need some time. Can I have the next 2 days off? I can't say yes to him at all, right? And that led to him sucking it up a lot and just, grinding through it. And then once he did, have that conversation, I said like, okay, how much time realistically do you need? And he says, I just don't feel good. Like health-wise, I don't feel good. Mentally, I'm not feeling well. I'd love some time off. And we looked at our schedule. We looked where we were at. We were looking at, the long haul for the rest of the season. Like, where do we need Gamsu? How much time does he need off? How much is this going to help? And we made the choice, right? But that's kind of the way things are structured, right? I think it'll get better. The league will get better about it. The teams will get better about it. The players are going to get better about it. Comes down to a lot of day-to-day health things, but that's truthfully what it was.
I've got one other roster-related question. So, in light of the whole Dream Casper situation and obviously what happened there, right, I would understand. Like, do you remember roughly what date that was that whole situation happened?
Relatively.
Like, I think it was just after the trade deadline had closed, right? Wasn't it? Like
yes.
a few days
Yeah,
after?
Yes.
Okay, so fair enough. Obviously, you didn't know at the time, but you signed just before the trade deadline closes another support player. Now, am I missing something? Have you got some like secret thing? Do you need a colony of support players? Haven't you got like 5 already? And the guy on your staff who apparently is really good as well. Like, what's going on here, Huck? Why not another DPS or whatever? Obviously you couldn't have foreseen this one, but what's the logic behind
to be
this
fair,
guy?
the support players are the weakest part of this roster, so I somewhat understand.
So start cutting some of them.
I mean, we looked at. There was a lot of things we looked at. We looked at the patch, the new hero. We looked at the skill of the players that were in Korea. It was partially a business move as well, right? There's these rumors about expansion teams coming in. If they do come in, they're going to need some quality players. We're kind of looking at it as he brings value to the team no matter what. We think that there can be improvements on how things are played on the flex support position. I think Snow for our team, obviously we're kind of circling around that whole support conversation. He's very good. We've tried to work with him to try to get his communication more in line with the system that we're using, right? To put it simply, like anytime you're a team, you want to hit like a glass full 100% communication, right? And some teams have one player that's like 50%, 70%, 80%, and everyone else is 5% or whatever. We always wanted everyone kind of contributing equally. Snow is a guy that's very, very vocal who did not align with Dream because Dream was our main shot caller, and then once he departed, we needed to fit mistakes in, and we didn't want to change too many variables at once. I think during the stage break, we're kind of going to look at our team as a whole at the end. But, picking up Aim God and the timing around that was very unfortunate. Obviously, we felt very confident in our DPS players at the time. Even mistakes for Stream, there's trades off, right? I think Mistakes is a smarter player positionally and how he views the game. I think Dream was better mechanically and had a deeper hero pool, obviously. Now, maybe Mistakes makes that up by the end of the season. He realistically hasn't scrimmed a ton. And he's been second string, but it was just, like you said, unfortunate timing. Aim God we felt was very good, a player we saw potential in, and then even from a business standpoint, someone that maybe we would want to hold on to going into the off season.
Yeah, and just so people are aware, that's pretty common with the team owners in Overwatch League is that people have 12 slots on their roster. There was an attitude of let's pick up to 12 players, and then when the expansion teams come in, we can sell these contracts because we know who's good, and that's just a business decision that some teams have made. So when you see some of these roster pickups, that is what they mean a lot of the time is simply like hey, we've scouted this guy, he's really good, let's pick him up on a contract and we'll sell him to a new team and we'll make some money that way. So it's not, I'm just saying that's not unusual for people who might consider it a little bit odd.
When you said there that Mystics was obviously like second string because obviously you had Dreamcasper at the time, how does your team work in that sense? Like, do people who aren't starters get scrim time? Do they actually get to be involved somehow? Are they sort of, are you waiting until they actually know they're going to potentially be used in the lineup before they get worked in the rotation? How does it work?
It's a very difficult situation. So it's a conversation we have had as a group, like, you know, me I'm in the training room right now. I don't know if you can tell by just the weird off-white color, but you know, I'll stand in.
Here, move your camera so people can see the player uniform poster, because that thing is actually pretty funny. It's the player requirement poster for how the uniforms must be on stage.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm you know, this is I sit in the corner, and then whenever I dress the team, I got to stand right in the middle, and they kind of, you know, circle me. And we've had a few difficult conversations with the players. That realistically, it is not an easy conversation to have, because of the way things are. And this isn't just, you know, me putting all the blame on the league or the schedule. They are substitutes, right? And I think in Overwatch in particular, you never had this issue, or even other esports, because, you know, in Overwatch, you had your 6 players. Maybe you had a 7th, but realistically, you had 6 players, and you kind of just played together. And you never had substitutes. For us, especially because how we approach things and the uncertainties we had in the players, we picked up, you know, a reasonable amount. We picked up 10 players, and they just a lot of the players don't get a lot of playing time, and we try to get them in when we can, and we've taken some players a little bit more seriously. Like, I think Note and Kalios throughout the season, so they've kind of swapped who's starter, who's not starter, and we've had them learn from each other. And we've said, you know, Kalios does this really well. Nope, we want you to start doing this. And we said, nope, you know, you can teach Kalios this, or Kalios, this is what Note is doing well. But some of those positions were a little farther from each other, right? Even speaking on, you know, Mistakes and Dream, Mistakes didn't have the comms that we needed, right? He even now, he is not a big talker, and he's improving and he's getting better communicating, but Dream kind of stepped up in that way that we needed, right? And because he stepped up and continued to step up, he kind of solidified him as the starter. Same thing with Striker. Striker, you know, obviously filled a role for us. So we've had players, obviously our starting 6 are the ones that have played the majority of the time. Even last stage when Dream was starting, we tried to fit in Mistakes a good amount. You know, we played him on Zombra, we played him on Junkrat. But like Avast and Snow, we've had difficulty. Like, I think Avast is a great player, but he really likes to take the reins. He calls, and he's a leader.
He's very vocal.
Yeah, he's even like, if I was going to say, like, who could be potentially a good staff member, or who could be a good caster after this, or who at least has that career path if they chose it, I would say Avast. He's like very articulate, very smart, very witty. But we don't need that, and we never foresaw the team as, you know, having that one person lead it. Dream kind of ended up being that for us, but we never wanted that. So Avast has stepped in, and he's, you know, very good, but we see Calyx is a little bit more mechanically gifted, and Calyx doesn't communicate that much, but it's not a problem for us. So it's always that trade-off, right? And we try to fit them in when we can. We try to get them playing time. We try to work with them. We try to, you know, get them to improve. Even yesterday, we had our day off, but Shake was pouring over Snow's VODs. You know, Snow sent him some VODs, said, hey, can you review this? Can you help me? Can you, you know, tell me what I can do better? And we do what we can, but it's not an easy discussion, right? And I understand that. If I was a pro player and I was in their shoes, I would want more playing time. I would want more scrim time, but realistically, we gotta win 2 games every week, right? And you want to put your team in the best position possible to do that every week. So that doesn't mean, you know, you can just, hey, we like you, so we're going to give you playtime, and that's going to hurt us on match day. But, you know, it's just, that's how it is.
I mean, perfectly logical. Like, as far as the roster movements are concerned, makes absolute sense, and I think the proof is there in your results. With your team, so I think one of the things that as we get into gameplay, obviously you've made this big transition from Dream Casper to Mistakes, and you say that he was a primary shot caller within the team, but from the outside, when you guys played against New York and you won, it looked like all your shot calling was intact, in that your dive, which is what your team began to be known for, was working really well. Like the Gamsu striker synergy was fantastic. And so it didn't really look like you guys had missed a beat. How hard was that on you as a team or on the players to fix your comms? Because it didn't look from the outside like you guys were having any problems.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think even in this, humans can adapt when they're forced to. And I think that's our team. Our team was forced to adapt. And it wasn't a question. When you're giving the option, it's hard to tell a player to be quiet so other people can step up. But when you remove someone that has been doing that and everyone kind of has to step up more, they naturally do it. So I think like Gamsu in particular has done a great job, and he's kind of been the de facto shot caller for us now, but it's a lot more equal throughout the players. So if we're glass full and maybe Dream was like a 70 or an 80 for us, Gamsu's probably more like a 40 to 50 for us. Or even less, maybe a 30 even. So everyone's kind of just stepped up. We worked with players. We told them, moving into this, we would review VODs and we would say, all right, you need to start calling this. You guys need to be looking out for that. You need to start communicating. We just kind of took it one step at a time, right? I think because we had a system in place very early on about how we wanted to communicate and how we wanted individual players to call certain things, it was very easy to kind of outline like, this is what that person used to call, and now you are going to take this part, this player is going to call this more, and we're going to kind of get there together. We still have issues, right? No matter what, even when we were doing our best, even if that's now, there's always issues, and we just always work on them, right? So we'll push players on a day-to-day basis, like, you need to call this, we need to review this. We just take it one day at a time.
Can you talk about your communication philosophy, or is that Lost in Uprising secrets?
I mean, I could talk about them non-specifically. I think in general, we have done a better job of teaching players, is what I would say was a big part of our success thus far. I think it's very easy to go to a player and point out everything they do wrong, right? And anybody that understands Overwatch at a high level can do that. And they can, make a list and say, like, they can go over a VOD, timestamp it, and point out every little thing that is wrong. What we have done better is understanding, kind of from a teacher mentality, what each player's way of learning is and how to best articulate information to them. So if I look at any given player, I kind of go through this process in my head of like, okay, how do they receive information? What is the best way to package this information that we want to teach them? Who is the best person to have that conversation? What do we need to do outside of that conversation to help them? Are we putting a sticky note on their monitor and telling them to, look at that every day and kind of remind themselves between each scrim? Is it, okay, this guy needs to go into ranked after scrims and work on shot calling? Or, if it's, let's just say Orisa Hog, like, how maybe Note and Gamsu need to play together so they can get that timing of the pool together, and the communication. So we kind of look at everything, no matter what we're teaching, and we work with the individual players to help them improve on a day-to-day basis. But as far as like communication, a lot of that's privileged information, I would say, and we do get a little upset sometimes when things are leaked on the broadcast that we would not prefer. When they cut to comms, the team comms, and a lot of times it's just like Winston, nice, and then a lot of times it's like, I think there was a
monkey.
Yeah, but there was one time they leaked Dream's comms, and he was talking about.
I know exactly what you're referring to.
Yeah, and he was referring to us particularly targeting a certain individual because we knew they were the main shot caller and that they were going to struggle if he wasn't in the game. So there's certain times like that, but in general, like, we just get creative. There's like a very popular acronym that we used early on that has rang true up until now that we came up with that has helped us a lot. There's certain cadences that we use, or there's certain information that we feel is a priority. But in general, I don't think it's too complicated. I obviously don't want to get into it, but don't feel like we're using like football calls or something like blue 76. All right, run blue 76 play. Nothing like that. We're just kind of normal Overwatch stuff. I just think we do a little bit better, being professional, taking a good path with the guys.
Okay. Right, let's start talking about some of the other teams in the league now. So here's a question for you, Monty. New York Excelsior is the top team in the league. They're obviously still top in the standings. That's how fantastic they were earlier. And they have still been winning pretty much all their games. But if you look at it, their last 4 series have all been 3-2s. Obviously, they lost the one to Boston. So they're losing a lot of maps. Is there a broad stroke reason, you think, as to why everyone's closer to New York Excelsior now?
Yeah, because New York is sandbagging. I mean,
what does that mean, Monty?
That means that I strongly suspect that they are not practicing as much as they were previously, and that they have such a large lead that they're giving their players a break. Again, I don't know anything specific. Like, I've actually yelled at New York's management and directly asked them what their practice schedule is, and they won't answer my questions. So I think that they are ramping down practice time because they have a huge cushion on the rest of the league for playoffs, and that they are running a lot of default strategies and to not burn their players out. So I look at them, and unlike last stage where New York was custom tailoring, what are you grinning about?
Nothing.
Just wait until you finish. Yeah, no. He's waiting for you to finish this, Monty, and then he's going to give the real version.
They've been running a lot of the same strategies, like default cookie cutter strategies on maps over and over and over again. That's not what they were doing last stage, where they were tailoring their strategies to their opponents. They have been more reliant on Pine, and they have been putting Pine in to sort of cause chaos and have the clutch factor that he brings, rather than relying on strategies. Because if you look at last stage, there was no Pine, and they were saying, okay, we're going to custom tailor all these strats to our opponents, and that's how we're going to win games. This time, they're running cookie cutter strategies, and they're throwing Pine in to push them over the top. There's also the issue of Jonas, who's been playing really poorly recently. He's been jumping. They've been trying to play more aggressively, but the rest of the team is not very aggressive, so he'll just jump in and die alone. And then when they switch to mono, they win these maps. So it's like a lot of times, the last couple of matches they've played where they've reverse swept both times, it's Jonas has been in for the first couple of maps, and then by map 3, it's mono who's in with Pine, and they clutch out the win. So
in the NBA, Monty, there was a very famous point guard. His name was Jason Kidd, right?
Yeah.
And as a joke, people used to call him Asen Kidd because he had a very poor jump shot, and they would be like, haha, he's Asen Kidd because he's got no J. Well, if Janice is just failing, jumping in aggressively all the time, then I feel like the joke writes itself on that one. I didn't make his name that. The joke writes itself.
Wow.
That's all I'm going to tell you. Anyway,
That's a great reference.
Back to the broadcast. Right. So, Huck, listen, Monty has his own sort of persona he's carved out. We know which teams he likes. We know he has to have, we all do as analysts, you have to have the mental framework to explain, win or loss, what happened. Were you buying that? Do you buy that New York sandbagging a bit? Or perhaps they're doing things like, for example, playing Pine, knowing that, we can just not play him in the playoffs if we want, but maybe he'll still let us win this game. Do you buy it?
I do. I think there's a lot of truth. I think maybe it wasn't as conscious of a decision as it seems from the outside. I think we talked about burnout. We talked about these problems. I think any team that goes through those problems needs more time off. That being said, I think they're cutting it very close, right? I think if you're winning games barely, but still winning games, and you're kind of taking it a little easy, that's fine, right? But if you start losing games, I don't care, if the players are kind of, well, we'll probably make playoffs anyways. We're probably going to be first seed. Winning is, the ultimate, everyone's happy. Everybody's, not having issues. Everyone shows up to work. But when you start losing, that's when people get frustrated, right? So I look at New York and I look at them, even when you cut to like their player cams in between rounds, and I look at the VODs, and I do see them, mentally not having a good time when they're down 0-2, or they barely won 3-2, or they're walking out behind stage, barely squeaking by. From my perspective, I think it's always good to get your guys rest. I think it's a smart decision for them to kind of cut back, because realistically, I think they will be the first place team by the end of the year, and it's very hard not to imagine that, as much as I would like to. But I think they're cutting it very close.
You would take a catastrophic losing streak for them to be knocked out of their current position.
Yes.
Which is very unlikely given their skill level.
But they were still close, right? Like, they were 3-2 against Philly. They were 3-2 against Gladiators. If they lost those 2 games, obviously, then they would have 5 losses, right? And we're at 8 losses. And now it would be very close. But they squeaked it out. So I think they're fine. I think they'll be first. I think the strategy and the outlook is fine. But I question at this point, if you're almost losing games, do you really want to give that up? And I do think, to a certain degree, they're being caught up to, I would say. I think that their play style, people have kind of figured out. I think, to a certain degree, I wouldn't say they're one-dimensional, but there are some tells within how they play the game, and people are starting to look at them.
Such as?
Hard to say.
No, it's not hard to say. You mean I don't want to say. Those are 2 different things.
Yes. Yeah.
If I think there are tells that are being caught up on, then surely it's not proprietary Boston Uprising information.
Some of them are.
All right.
I think they're a good team. I still think they're the best team. I think if we played them in playoffs, it would be really tough games. But I think if we always talk about the gap is getting smaller between all the teams, right? We barely beat them. Mayhem almost beat us. I mean, all of our matches recently have been like 3-2, 2-1, 3-2, 3-2. A lot of New York's have been that. It's just, if you look at how many matches go to Game 5, a lot of the teams are getting close, right? And that's good for New York. And it's unfortunate for some of the bottom tier teams that probably won't make the playoffs just because, they didn't start out on the right foot. So I think there's some truth to it. But at the same time, I think I would personally be worried if I was, part of their coaching staff.
Well, one thing that is noticeable when you look at the games that have been these really close ones is all the talk about JJoNak is the MVP of the league. He's dying all over the place. It does seem as though that aspect seems to have changed to some degree. He's not just styling on everyone every single game like he did before.
Well, we talked about this last week, but actually even before the Boston match. So I was talking to our stats guy, and one of the stats that came up before Boston won was that Boston kills JJoNak more than any other team. And killing JJoNak is very important, because if you don't kill him immediately with a dive, then he just melts your tanks. So Boston was always a team that was very good at dealing with JJoNak, because you have to deal with the outlier of New York, because the way they play is unlike any other team, because they have identified JJonak's strengths, and he is sort of a freak in that way. So if you can't deal with him instantly, then he does JJoNak things on you, and it becomes very, I think, challenging to work with. And what's actually funny is, like, people don't know this, but I've spoken with a lot of the professional teams, and JJoNak has caused a lot of internal problems with other teams. And the reason why is that there's this disease that goes around the league that we'll call JJoNak syndrome, which is that because JJoNak is so good at Zenyatta, all of the other flex support players want to be JJoNak. So they see New York Excelsior doing super well, right? And they're like, oh, JJonak's being pocketed. He's the one who's being damage boosted. He's the one who's being healed by Arc. So what's happened with a bunch of the teams, like there are 3 or 4 teams that I know of where their flex supports have said, I want to be pocketed like JJoNak. So they get the Jonak syndrome, even though they don't have Jonak's skill level. So they think that because New York is doing well by pocketing Jonak, that is the right way to play the game. And they're also envious of Jonak's like highlight reel plays.
This is
and
all
they
very
want to
true.
be, yeah, it's 100%
Very
true.
true.
It's actually fucking hilarious, like the Jonak syndrome going around behind the scenes. But none of these guys are good. And the thing is that they don't understand why Jonak is good. Like Jonak is good because he fucks you up at close range, which is why when people say, hey, what about those, right-click Zenyatta nerfs that are coming in? Will that affect Jonak? My answer is no. It's not going to do anything to him, because what makes him scary is that when you get close to him, he's a freak of nature at aiming and killing you. So any Zenyatta can know the right angle to hold the right click, and like hit those shots if you have good timing. What's crazy about Jonak is he couples that with very precise close range accuracy.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I completely agree. I think there is that syndrome, and that's bad, right? That is a problem for teams.
It's one of my favorite things about Overwatch League right now is the fucking Jonak syndrome, because people just like they just like, instead of playing to their own strengths, they're like, New York is good. Why is New York good? And then all the flex supports players are like, yes, you must pocket me, teammates, now. And then they lose their shit when they're not pocketed. And it's really like, beyond Jonak's own ability, the seeds of discord that he has sown within other teams simply by having his play style is like the sickest mind game of all time, because everyone else is convinced that they should do it. And then so he's actually causing internal turmoil in other teams, which is just amazing feat.
Yeah, and completely truthful. And that's a problem for a lot of teams, right? If you don't have the right team culture and you don't have the right structure, and you have players that have big egos and can make that decision, it can be very, very negative. And that's why I think this aspect and other aspects, but when players can take that attitude and they don't look at it from a team perspective, and they just think, hey, you need to pocket me, I need to be this, we need to play around me, I'm not getting enough peels, or I'm not getting enough healing, then you can suffer as a team, right? But that is 100% true. I completely agree.
That's also why the player that Jonak actually reminds me of the most, just in terms of his impact in the game and how close the second place person is to him, is actually Madlife from League of Legends. Because in the early days, part of what made Madlife unbelievably good and by far the best support player was that he was actually insanely mechanically good at the game. And at that point in time in League of Legends, actually all the other support players basically were ward bots, and they didn't used to get any gold, and they couldn't really make plays because they played stuff like Sona or Lulu or something. Their job was just be a support. And then this guy came in, and then the whole thing is, he's someone where if you ever hear his story, he's one of those players who didn't start out as a support player. He just picked it because when they made the team, everyone else had their roles set or something ridiculous. So obviously if you looked at his skill set, Madlife probably should have been like a AD carry or something, or mid laner or something. So likewise, if you look at Jonak's raw mechanical skill, this guy probably should be on Widowmaker or something. He shouldn't be a Zenyatta player, should he?
The dumb shit about Jonak on Zenyatta is he doesn't even heal people. His healing stats are not great.
Too busy killing people, man.
Yeah, he doesn't. The thing about it is that he's so busy right clicking so the thing about Zenyatta is you can't change your orb target during a right click. So he's basically charging constantly, and he doesn't even bother healing people or discording people. He just kills them. He just fucking kills them. It's crazy. You shouldn't be able to do that, but he does it.
Yeah, I mean, he's really good. I think the biggest thing is his sensitivity is so low. I know Bleeple, our analyst, actually, he has a one-off account where he plays almost exclusively Zenyatta, and he changed his sense to his sense just to understand okay, how does this work? How is he hitting his shots? And that's when you get up close and you have that low of a sense, then his tracking is just insane, right?
Yes.
And I think Mani hit it right on the head that if you're fighting Jonak, long distance, everyone, it's just more of a probability, right? You're taking an angle, you're throwing orbs down a high traffic area, and you're hoping you're hitting something. But when you get up close and you're fighting that tracer, you're getting dove, and you're gonna hit headshots, and you're gonna shut down a Genji blade or a pulse bomb or a Winston or whatever it might be. that's where Jonak gets a little bit deadlier.
That's also where, like, to be fair, if you're a fan or just another player, like, that is where everyone acts like plebs sometimes, because the same thing used to happen in Counter-Strike very famously. People always wanted to know what sensitivity the player had. And I'll give you a good example, actually. So it was actually another Canadian player. It was the legendary Counter-Strike player, Shagwar, who was an AWPer, right? And obviously with the AWP, you can be really flashy if you're really skilled. And he was very famous for, like, not only, like, super fast shots, but he could hit all the, like, sort of no-scopes when they come up close on you, which is, in theory, the weakness of the AWP in the Counter-Strike. Now, here's the thing. Because I was actually friends with him, I once got, like, his exact setup, and I was like, right, let me give it a go of this, because I've actually got, like, at the time he used one of those big mouse pads, you know, and I set it all up, and I was like, you must be telling me some of the settings wrong, because I'm using it and it's like way too slow, man. Like, you know, like to do a 180 required more than a swipe across this whole mouse pad. I was like, you know, when I see it on the screen, you're hitting all these shots really fast. And even though admittedly he was someone else who had a big ego, so he did just go, you don't understand, dude, I'm just that fast, which is just like, okay, hand up, like, get the fuck out of my face. But here's the thing, Monty, beyond the ego, he was right. Like, it doesn't matter if you have the sensitivity. If someone is, like, unbelievable mechanical skill, he could use, like, any sensitivity almost. So, like, you'd actually be amazed how many of the AWPers in Counter-Strike use very low sensitivities like that, because the whole point is they have just mastered, like, their flick, exactly what the distance is. They've got it literally down like a pitcher would in baseball, or someone who does some raw element of a sport. They're that unbelievably good that, like, it's nothing to do with some secret sensitivity or mouse setup that no one else has figured out. They just mastered whatever their setup is.
Well, the other aspect of Jonak syndrome is all the flex supports changing their sensitivity, like Huck is saying with his coach. That actually happened.
You know, if I was Jonak, by the way, obviously probably doesn't speak great English, so you can't really do this. But if I was him, I'd be going up to the other players after the game. Like, I'd meet the other Zenyatta player and like, you know, when they do the handshake, and I'd go, great game, you know, you just don't get the same treatment, you know, why don't they ever feature you? Never mind, we'll talk about it later. And then you'd just be sowing the seeds of discord. Right, yeah, basically, yeah. But yeah, I'd be playing it all up like that, you know, like.
But yeah, that scenario within Overwatch League has been incredibly amusing to watch, because of course New York is being smart. They're playing around their players' strengths, and everyone else thinks that it's a meta thing, and so it's caused all these arguments within teams about how much the Zenyatta should be pocketed.
Well, that's the funny thing, isn't it? If you think about the success they've had in all three stages, it shows it has pretty much nothing to do with the meta. It's to do with having Jonak and your particular team that you can do that.
Well, that's one of the things that Boston has done really well, is shut him down. So we can talk about how good Jonak is, but factually, Zenyatta is not a tank. He's relatively easy to kill. So what Jonak does is he abuses mistimed dives and kills people. If there is a perfectly timed dive, he will die. There's not really anything you can do about it, and that's where Boston came in, and Boston probably is the best dive team in terms of coordination in the league right now, and so they have a much better opportunity to shut down Jonak than many other teams, and that's what we saw in their win.
Thanks. I mean, I think it's true to a certain degree. I think there's a few different ways you could look at New York and who they have in the game and play around them, and it depends on the maps and stuff, but we've never specifically kind of like we've never sat down as a team and said, like, all right, we're playing against New York, let's talk about Jonak, and like done a complete review. I think our style versus their style was good, especially, you know, the last time we played against them and the maps that we had. Obviously it was
a very good map pool for you when you played against New York. Very good.
Yeah. Yes, and the match was still insanely close, and I still think they're a great team, and they're probably still the best team in the league. We had a good day, maybe they had a bad day. I mean, right after that, we played Mayhem the next day or two, and then there was another 3-2 match, right? So what match is more telling, the win against New York or the close win against Mayhem? It's hard to say, but those are the kinds of things you got to kind of dissect and look at and how to play around them. The biggest thing is with kind of the Jonak syndrome, that's it's just really toxic to a certain degree, right? If you have that internal conflict and you're, only so many people can get resources, right? And I think Bonnie hit it on the head that New York, I don't even know if they consciously made the decision, like, let's play around Jonak, right? What most likely happened is it's more like Darwin theory with teams of, like, if something's working, you just kind of keep doing it. And then if it's not working, you kind of like test things out, and then it kind of works. And it's not as structured as it should be for most teams. But that's kind of where you run into a problem, right? I think players should always have input into decisions, and they should always give their opinion because they're going to have a very different perspective than coaching staff. And a lot of times, it's not the same as traditional sports, right? Like we talked about Bill Belichick. He grew up studying football, right? And he kind of worked on it for years and years and years, and then he eventually ended up in the position that he's in now, right? But he's earned that, right? Overwatch is a new game, right? A lot of guys have been playing and watching it for the same time as the players, and players are going to have certain insights. But coaching staff should always be kind of, that unbiased source of making decisions. That's why they're there, right? So you can have players give input, and you can, talk to your flex supports, and the flex supports can say, like, I should be pocketing more, we should be playing like this. This is how New York plays. At the end of the day, players should ultimately, in my eyes, always kind of default to like what is the best for the team holistically. But some teams have that dynamic and some teams don't, right? And I don't think any team has it perfectly. There's always going to be ego and player bias that comes in, but it's a struggle for teams that have that syndrome.
Right, to talk about another team then, a team that obviously came into this stage as the talk of the town was the Philadelphia Fusion because of how well they did in the playoffs of Stage 2, and then now as a team, obviously except for the period where they didn't have EQO because of that suspension, people say like the roster's just so versatile, and I saw people arguing that they were the team with the most potential in the Overwatch League or something crazy like that. So it's been a bit of derailing of that hype train, right, Monty?
I think they're still doing well, so it's.
They lost to the San Francisco Shock.
Okay, well, I think that was a specific situation. So why they lost to the San Francisco Shock, I think, is that they went to 5 games against New York the previous night, and then literally had the first game against the Shock the next day. So the Shock had to prepare this week against the Dallas Fuel and the Philadelphia Fusion. And I think that was a scheduling thing more than anything else, because they got to play the Dallas Fuel and then they had a day off and then they play the Philadelphia Fusion. And Philadelphia, meanwhile, plays a very close set, gets reverse swept by New York, plays until like 10:30 at night, and then they have the first game the next day. I just don't think they were prepared. I think you give them a day off and it's a very different game versus the Shock. Also, I don't think I don't think you can discredit the Shock, because the Shock are strong in this meta, in particular because they have Dante on the Sombra, so they are sort of uniquely powered up this stage. And also Architect integrating into the team on the Genji and the Widowmaker was a major part of their success against Philadelphia as well.
Yeah,
so,
I think Philly's really strong, personally. I think
I
they're
do too.
probably like a top 4 team at least. I think we played them at the beginning of the stage when EQO was suspended,
yes.
But they were a team that we think are really, really good, and they have a lot of tools in their toolbox. I mean, they have a 12-man roster. They still have players that are going to come off the bench when they're allowed to. So overall, I think they're sitting pretty. I think they're a playoff team by the end of the year and probably even a contender. San Francisco, though, as well, like, I think they're going to get there, to be honest. I think by the end of the season, it's going to be too late for them and their record to make playoffs most likely, but I think they're going to be a really good team, and I think skill-wise, they probably should make playoffs by the end of the year, even though they won't. If they find their footing, because I look at that team and I think they as well have a lot of skilled players, and it's unfortunate, right? They didn't get the right start, like I said, and I think it's going to be hard for them. I think mathematically they're still in it, right, Monty?
Yeah, but they'd have to be like they'd have to go like 7-3, 8-2, and they'd have to also win the right matchups to knock other teams down. It's very unlikely, but it is possible.
Yeah. So we'll see, but it's going to be interesting, to have teams that are going to be doing better. I mean, maybe they make a stage 4 playoff run instead of the final.
I mean,
run,
they can make a stage 3 playoff run. They're in 4-2 right now.
Yeah, I think they're a good team, but I think Philly just is better. And I don't know if it was the match day or they over prepared or what it was, but I think both those teams are pretty scary. So I wasn't so surprised with the result, to be honest.
The problem is
this next week is going to be the real challenge, because it's like Yeah, London and New York Shock are playing this week. So I think we're going to get a real taste of how actually good they are. Just like this last week, we got a real taste of how good Valiant actually was after having a softer schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there. You go through these humps too, right? Like the first time we beat a Korean team, there was multiple humps. It was like the first time we started doing well in scrims, the first time we ever beat like Seoul or New York or London in scrims, or LA Gladiators even. First time you have like a really good comeback, the first time you win a tiebreaker, the first time you beat a Korean team, all those things kind of build confidence in the guys and the staff, and everyone realizes like, hey, we can do this. I'm not sure what that locker room dynamic is for the Shock, but when I look at that team, I think, you know, they have a lot of really good players. So.
Okay. What do you think about the LA Valiant then? Because this is a team that's been all over the place over the different stages. So where are they now for you, Huck? What do you think of Valiant?
I think they're probably like a top 6 team. I don't know. It's weird, right? When you look at like the Soon Agilities situation, it's hard to balance. It's like the starter dynamic. Like if you put a player in and they gel with that roster and they keep playing with that roster, you know, they get better and better. But when you switch people out and you try to do, you know, it's similar with Philly. They have EKO and then they have the Snillo and Carpe situation. I'm not a huge fan of it, you know, but you got to work with what you got. You know, luckily for us, earlier in the season,
what are you a huge fan of?
It's hard to practice and gel and switch maps, and you know, even if they had
someone who
this,
just comes in for a specific map or a specific half of a series.
It's hard. Yeah, it's really hard for the player. It's really hard for the team. Even when you talk about these main tanks, right? So like Janus and Mano, they have very different play styles to them, and there's a few situations like this in different roles. And I think even in the last episode of the Valiant video content that they did, they talked about, you know, how certain players are more passive and certain players are more aggressive. I think it's really hard right now for professional players to kind of change speeds, right? For me, I look at it from like a poker situation, right? If you're a professional poker player and you sit down at a table and you only play like one nitty conservative play style, players are going to pick up on that and they're going to play off of you. You have to be able to change speeds. And I think right now, a lot of Overwatch League players are having difficulty changing speeds. And that comes down to like understanding why you're changing speeds or how different compositions play off each other depending on the map, and just having like a good general in-game IQ. But when you're swapping, you know, Soon, you're swapping agilities, and then you have Bunny on the Tracer, I just think it makes things difficult, and it's hard for those players kind of to reset their brains and think like, okay, now we need to play this way. So if they're still stuck in being ultra aggressive, but they need to be passive with this next guy coming in, it just leads to a lot of miscoordination. And then even in scrims, you know, that's going to happen. You're going to have this guy coming in cold. Even if they did like the sister team swap, I don't understand how that would work, even from a logistics scheduling standpoint, right? Like if I have a sister team and they're playing against somebody in a scrim, and then I have my main team playing another scrim, the maps have to end at the exact same time for me to swap players in and out, and then back again for the next map. It seems hard. I think Soon and Agilities are both very, very good players, but you know, I don't want to comment too much. I don't want them to watch this video and be like, yeah, you know, one of the players are like, yeah, Huck said that. That's why I should be the starter, whatever.
I think you're putting too much faith in other teams and players,
it'll be
mate.
Huck syndrome. It'll be Huck syndrome next. You just comment on the show. Just start fucking with everyone else's team, like the Jonak syndrome, get in their heads.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's doable. I think Philly do a good job of balancing it, but I think it has to be a lot more specific as far as like what maps do we use these players on? How are we playing around that? And like really explaining thoroughly what those engagements look like from comp to comp and the play styles and how everyone interacts with each other. You know, I don't know if they're doing that or not, or if they have other issues, but I just think it's a hard thing to do, right? You're making life very hard on everyone when you're swapping in players like that. But some teams do it well, some teams don't.
What do you think of the Valiant, Monty?
I think that they should not be running Bunny and Agilities together, because that Volskaya match that they played yesterday was honestly painful, and you know exactly what they're going to do, which is a Tracer Genji dive. So
On a Widow map.
Yeah, on a Widow map. I have no idea why they did that. I like, as soon as I saw the starting roster for Volskaya, I was like, well, they're going to lose. That's cool. Like, I have no idea what like prompted that decision. I do think that you can run Bunny and Agilities on, say, control maps, certain control maps. That's perfectly fine. But to run them on Volskaya was really weird. I do think they were overrated, but I've been the one saying they were overrated for the last few weeks because of their extremely soft schedule. And I also
swear, whenever I see the social media Overwatch League, like, you won't believe this streak that a team's on. I'm like, you mean who's had a really nice schedule and played like Shanghai Dragons, followed by Florida Mayhem, followed by Fuel? Like,
our friend Huck here is on a 10-match winning streak where he has beaten all of the Korean teams, New York, London,
yeah, that's
and
match
Seoul.
winning. I'm on about when people have map winning streaks.
Oh, yes.
Like every
yes.
map, unless you're New York Excelsior, your map winning streak just involves beating the bad teams 3 of them in a row, basically. Because you have to 4-0 people to do it.
Yes.
Yeah. And 4-0s are really hard right now.
Yeah, I do think that is, like you say, indicative of the quality of the opponents. But
Sure.
Valiant, so Valiant is in a very good situation. They're 5-1. They lost to London, but they still have a very good map differential for the stage. In fact, better than anybody else, including Boston, because, like you say, they were beating up on some of these bottom teams. And Valiant is lucky that they literally don't have to play New York this stage.
Yes.
So that makes a big difference for them.
Yeah, they could. I mean, they're still sitting pretty. I think they could still
Huck.
make playoffs.
That's kind of whack, isn't it? That teams just arbitrarily just might not play the best team in the league, and yet everyone's record's treated as though it's uniform, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird to think about it because you're not sure how biased you are. Like, we look at it. I remember Beezy from the Philly Fusion released a few different analyst articles on, like, the difference between how many maps each team have to prepare with, and I think we were on the bad side of that. And then there was also, like, how many teams have to, like, play late one night and then play early the next day or back-to-back days, and we were also on the bad side of that. And then I remember the first stage, the only team we didn't play was Shanghai. And you look at that and you're all these factors, you're like, man, like, why couldn't we get a lucky break? Why couldn't we have this? It's just, I understand why the league did it. It kind of sucks, but at the same time, like, I give them a lot of leeway just because no one really knew where everyone was going to be at, right? A lot of people were putting Shanghai pretty high up on their ranking list at the beginning of the year. No one knew they were going to be this bad. A lot of people didn't see New York being this dominant. So I think there could be a better season or a better way to do it next year. But as of right now, you kind of just take it as it comes, right? And I think we're okay. Maybe you view it as like you get to play New York. It's a learning experience. Yay!
I thought he was going to build it in there, Monty. Like, he was like, you know, then they checked. Turns out we were on the bad side of having to play all the maps. We had to play a lot of games back to back. We had to play all the top. We didn't even get to play the worst team. Fuck it, we're even better than I thought. We're actually, may as well be 10-0 now.
It was low key bragging. It was low key.
He was humble bragging the whole way.
Yeah, he was. Oh man, we didn't even get to the free win versus Shanghai in stage
Exactly,
1. We're
yeah.
still number 2. Holy shit! I think that's just it's not going to get better from here. Is all I'm going to say. Because as the league expands, there's going to be divisions are going to be more meaningful. It's like football in America. Some teams.
I hate that. Our division is so hard compared to the other division. We're Atlantic
Well,
specific.
you're only second in your division.
I thought you were talking about the Patriots, because that's definitely not something the Patriots can say.
No.
Because one of the reasons why the Patriots are good is because they're in a fucking division with the Jets, the Dolphins, and the Bills, and they play them for like half their games or like 6 games every year, right? So this is just how sports work. Is that you only have so many games. You can't play against everybody an equal amount of times. And that's the life we live. And yes, you can complain about your division.
Sports, by the way, Monty. These are esports.
I understand that, but the issue is that if we were to do it a different way and play 11 games instead of 10, then it would take another week of competition, etc. And over the course of the season, you do play against your divisional opponents very slightly more, because remember, to play against everybody equally would take 44 matches. Okay, 11 games a stage. The teams play 40 matches, so it is very, very close to being equal.
Yeah, I just hope you were.
I'm going to try and get Monty into some sort of business deal where, like, I owe him 44, then I just give him 40k, and I go, it's basically the same. It's very, very close. I'll take that 4k and pocket it myself, and don't worry about it. It's close. It's just close money. That's all you need to know.
I mean, but what situation are you not going to have this? Like, in any tournament, you could be in a bracket against an opponent that is not suited to your play style, even if you're the overall better team. There's always going to be these issues.
I just think if the divisions have more meaning in the future, right? Like if you're playing the majority of your opponents from your division, it might be tough for our division, right? If you look at who we have in our division, and it also,
especially in the future for playoff seeding type scenarios.
Let's be clear. Yeah. Nobody thought the Atlantic Division was going to be the better division coming in the season. Literally nobody.
I don't know. New York, everyone voted strong. London, people also voted as strong.
Come on.
No, I think people probably did think Pacific Hawk, because remember, people used to think Dallas Fuel was
yes,
good. I know it's a long time ago now, but people used to think they were really good, didn't they?
Yeah, Dallas.
I think it's touch and go.
Come on.
I think people did. Maybe not some other people, but.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Wow, some people thought something and some other people didn't.
You have to understand, Huck took his signing bonus and invested in Bitcoin. So he's just rich and successful. You know, I know people like you, a lot of people, so-called people like you, Monty, didn't know these things. But
come on, dude. Like, the most people thought that the Pacific Division was going to be the more challenging division. But as it matters, the divisions don't even fucking matter right now. They literally
more or
don't
less,
fucking matter.
I mean, the worst would be if all top 6 teams are Atlantic and then somebody does not make playoffs.
Except the Atlantic Division has the Florida Bayhem, so you're okay.
Yeah, but that'd be funny. Anyways, I mean, we could still end up in a situation where the Pacific Division gets a bye. You know, the top seed, even if they don't make like top 2, top 3, top 4, even, which would still kind of be.
Which is a problem at the moment with this team strength, obviously, since their best teams is Soul, Gladiators, Valiant.
Yeah, Soul and Valiant.
Yeah.
That's kind of bullshit.
Yep.
I'm allowed to say these things, Huck. I'm allowed to say these things, my friend.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I agree. I also do not like that situation. You could say that. So. Thing is, Huck, everyone can't be good in the league. Like, I already almost pulled you up when you tried to tell me that the Shock was top 6, because I quickly did the math in my head. Pretty sure you've got more than 6 teams in your top 6 there, mate, because who are you taking out? What, you taking out Gladiators? You taking out who's Soul Dynasty? Where's your 6? So we've got New York Excelsior, we've got Boston, right? We've got 4 spots left. Is Philadelphia Fusion in there?
Right. So, like, are we talking about right now or by end of season?
Right now.
Right now.
Because right now is different, right? I said that San Francisco has the tools, and by the end of the season, they could.
So this is for the end, right? I see.
Yes, they could be. Right now, if I was going to do top 6, I would say the 3 we just covered. Yeah. I think London's still there, despite their recent fallings from grace. And then the next 2 are just up for contention. Like Valiant could be there, Gladiators could be there, Shock honestly could be there. Maybe Houston.
So then let's talk about the team that you have not yet said, which is the Soul Dynasty. Soul Dynasty, obviously a team that's somewhat in trouble, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I think they should have beaten you the other day, man.
They could have, for sure.
Super close match against Boston.
Yeah.
We should have. We've
Also, it was a great map pool for them too. I actually think that they had a lot of advantages going into that.
Sounds like they fucking suck, Monty.
I guess they do.
It was close.
How many more advantages do they need?
I mean, I think they could still be it's like all these teams, like, sounds like I keep saying the same thing, like everyone could be good, it's very close, blah blah, but it really is. Like, if you even ask the players and you know, say like, how close are these teams, I think the results speak truthfully. Things are very close right now. I think Soul, you know, a lot of it comes down to the internal discussions they have with the players, right? You look at who's playing and who isn't playing, and you got to wonder what that looks like, right? From my perspective, if I have a disgruntled player that is trying to force something, even like the Jonak syndrome, right? Just as an example.
Sure.
If I had a player that was trying to force that, what I would want to do and what would put me in a difficult position to make a difficult decision would be, do I bench this player or not bench this player based on them trying to force something that necessarily isn't good for the team, right? And I think unlike the professional level of traditional sports right now, you still have a lot of teams that operate on like the player personalities and their egos and like what they think is best. And like I said, the players are going to have more fruitful information coming from them than you would in traditional sports because we're all starting more from a flat base. But you have to trust coaching staff to make an unbiased, fair decision for the betterment of the whole team. And if you can't do that, then you will struggle as a team. And maybe Seoul has that, maybe Seoul doesn't have that, but I think a lot of people from the outside in look at that team and look who's playing, and they look at the decisions that sometimes are being made, and they say, what are the coaching staff doing? I know at least, the Korean fan base are looking at that situation and thinking that, and I don't have any insights to what's going on there, but I imagine that they're at least working through some issues, in my opinion.
What do you think, Monty? Because I know, for example, if you go back far enough, I forget which the actual game was. Was it Gladiators? There was that game where Fletter did actually have a rare bad game and he got wrecked a bit. But after that, every game I've seen, he's still straight fire every match.
Yeah, he's been
they're
great.
not that good a team, though. So what's the problem? What's dysfunctional about
I don't understand what they're doing with their support line right now. Like Guido, apparently Jae-Hong was like out this week. Guido was in. I think that given Jae-Hong's historic skill, that may be an issue. I don't know. We've talked about this before with Seoul. I think the biggest problem with Seoul right now is actually their tank line. So Guido's been in, but Guido hasn't been bad. But their tank line is overextending a lot and causing their supports to die frequently. So they're very vulnerable to the dive right now because their peeling has not been excellent. So I don't know. Like it seems like. From my perspective, it seems more like a personality problem, like Huck is talking about, or an infrastructural problem, rather than a player skill problem, because we know how talented they can be. So the coaching staff, I also think they went way overboard on coaches. They have like 5 coaches or something. I don't know how you get anything done in that environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, too many cooks in the kitchen syndrome.
Yes, I think that's definitely what they're suffering from.
Yeah, I mean it's. Like I said, I don't have any specific insights, but there have, at least from what I've heard among other teams, there's like this delicate balance of power between too many coaches or too many players or kind of a bit of both, and there's not a clear top down, this is the way it's going to be.
So when you were also listing off names there, you didn't seem in that much of a rush to say Gladiators. So are you someone who's somewhat intemperate on the Gladiators? You don't think they're that good? You don't think they're that hot a team?
I mean, I think I named them as my like bubble, possibly top 5 or 6. I think, like, once again, if they get the right support, if they have the right structure, they definitely have the players. Hydration was a player we were, from a Boston standpoint, looking at who we thought was very good. I think Surefour, I'm gonna say this just from my experience with him on Team Canada and working with him a little bit on that side. I think coming into this, he had a little bit of an ego, and we've seen this. We've seen like some of these old school players that were considered one of the best players in the game for the last 2 years pre-Overwatch League, and a lot of them have struggled coming into Overwatch League. Right, there's a lot of players on the bench right now that were considered like one of the top players, and now in Overwatch League they're struggling. But I think Surefour, he had that issue and he's kind of put it behind him, and he's back to like. I agree. I mean,
his Widowmaker stats this stage are actually crazy. He's one of the best Widowmaker players we have right now, and I think that's true. Surefour, I think, did have an ego. Got into Overwatch League, realized that he was going to have to work harder to maintain his position. He has a lot of natural talent, though, and now he's sort of come around again. I think right now this is the best we've seen Surefour in Owl, so that's cool to see.
And I think that's hard to do from a pro player perspective, right? I think a lot of pro players, you have a certain thing that motivates you, and you reach a certain height, and then to dip down and come back up is a really, really hard thing to do. So I think he's done a great job. I mean, they obviously have a great chaser player. Like I said, hydration, I think, on some specific projectile heroes is very good. Their backline generally is pretty good. They pretty much, with Fisher, they once again can be a very, very scary team by the end of the year. But can they get there from now until then? Who knows, right? I think I mean, from the beginning, I've always said that I think a lot of these teams can literally be the best team and win the championship by the league. I think New York has done the best job, and they have some incredibly star players like Jonak, Sableby, Mano, even Libero. You know, he's been doing better lately. So they kind of have a leg up on the competition. But I honestly think any team could win the championship by the end of the year. It's just who can get their crap together, who can avoid the speed bumps with issues, who can, you know, grind it out to the end of the year. So I think Gladiators, they could be a playoff team or even a contender by the end of the year. But can they get there by then? Who knows, right? I think every team is just constantly. I would say it's like you're on a boat, right? You have all your players and you have all your staff, and there's just constantly holes in your boat. You're trying to patch them up, and you're trying to put, you know, patch them, put Band-Aids, and some holes are bigger or smaller, and every team's trying to go through that right now, and whoever has the best boat by the end of the year is going to win the championship.
And in the case of Dallas Fuel, theirs is like Life of Pi, and they've got like 8 lions, tigers on there as well, and one of them's French, and his brother, another tiger, swimming behind the boat, and he's trying to get on, and then they're trying to keep him from getting. Anyway, you see where I was going with that one. I won't extend that too much further, Huck.
I mean, it's they definitely, you know, they've had issues. It's hard to be the number 1 rated Western team, come into Overwatch League, not perform, have players that have that mentality as well, very similar to what I was outlining with Surefour, not get the results, and then if you do not have the correct team culture and the perspective and kind of like the hard knocks of going through that period with the right attitude, you're just going to keep struggling. Like even something I've experienced with my time here, there's some things that you need to address immediately and you need to do it with a firmer hand, even if you suffer in the short term, right? Okay. And when we talk about Seoul and their internal issues, maybe that's what they're doing. I don't know, right? But sometimes when you try to, you know, like if you have a flex support player that is like, you know, constantly battling you, saying, you know, I need to be pocketed, I need resources, I need to be damage boosted, all these things. And if you kind of play into it too much and like, okay, we'll try, and you keep feeding that beast, you can end up in a worse situation if you just at the beginning said, listen, you know, for Dallas Fuel, we're struggling. We are not as good as we thought we are. We suck right now. We need to get better, and everyone needs to put their ego behind them because we all suck together. But it's hard to do, right? You have a lot of personalities. Like that whole Kai situation. I mean, I've you know, obviously kept up with it a good amount. I think a lot of the comments are true. I think they had a lot of issues. Bottom line is, I think Kai's not that bad at his job. Maybe he wasn't in the right role, but I think he definitely has, you know, a lot of good qualities about him. I think he's a great, like I would say, like performance coach, player coach. You know, he's someone that can go up to a player, reason with them. He's had the experience as a pro player. He can talk about a lot of the issues. I know Cloud9 had a lot of issues when he was on the team, so he has the experience to be a good coach. It was just a very, very difficult situation.
Yeah, and he has a great mind for the game too. I think where Kai might come up short is being a personal leader, but you know, as far as understanding the game and understanding strategy and being able to help players understand that, as like you say, a player coach, I think he is very good.
Yeah, but they've stumbled too much, and it's really hard to turn that team around, right? And I think if you were going to do that realistically to save the season, it would have had to been a long time ago.
I mean, the thing is, Huck, people would look at it. This is one of the problems I actually have with how a lot of people analyze the teams, is that they might just look at the record, or they might say, for example, oh, there's a lot of 3-2 games here. That's good, it's okay that they lost. Still close game. The way I look at these teams is I think of it like sports. So, okay, which are the teams that everyone wants to play for? Which are the teams that have all the money to buy the players? Which are the teams that already have a good foundation? And then if you're a team who underperforms, like Seoul Dynasty, like Dallas Fuel, I judge you more harshly. If you're a team like Florida Mayhem, where you had 6 players, you already didn't come in insane form. You're like okay form and contenders, okay? You did well there, but it wasn't all the top teams. You come into the league and you're doing bad. Okay, fair enough. I can give that team a bit more time. The problem with the Fuel is they're basically the anti-Boston Uprising. They had all the big names. They had all the money. They've even signed a bunch of players since they had their problems. They've done all these different things, like they've let the players have a massive say in coaching and how the team plays. They've pretty much done the opposite of what everything you've done, seemingly, Huck. And so when they then end up with a terrible performance, and as far as we can tell, the worst culture in the league, I mean, you can make some sorts of comments about this that don't have to do with how close the league is and stuff. I mean, they've gone down some bad paths, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some truth to that. If this was like an investment portfolio for Overwatch League, we took the short end, they took the long end on players, right? They bet on the tried and true. We bet on, there's a lot of diamonds in the rough here. And I think they still have the talent on their roster, but I think, the roster was outdated. Not everyone, but some of the people were a little bit outdated. That being said, I think Rascal's a great player. If he would have been properly integrated into that roster, I think between him and Effect, they could have been a very scary duo. I think Seagull still has a lot of talent. I think, AKM in the right situation. OGE obviously was a big pickup for them. It's just, besides Shanghai, it was a bad storm. Things were not, once again, if they're a boat in the water, they did not take the right course. They did not address the holes in their boat. They took on more water, and they just kind of got worse and worse and worse. And at this point, I saw some lights for them even this stage. I thought there were moments where they showed that they could be a good team, but every loss that piles on, it becomes more difficult, right? And that's what I was talking about with New York. If you're squeaking out the wins and you're kind of taking it easy, that's fine. But when you start occurring loss after loss after loss, especially with that high of an expectation, it just gets harder and harder. And when we talk about team culture and locker room dynamics and all those kinds of things, and you see how much their players are acting out, obviously they do not have the right dynamic, right? Now, it has a lot to do with ego and personality and some mismanagement, or at least, I wouldn't say mismanagement, as more of like things could have been done better. I don't think in particular the staff, whether you look at the ownership or the coaches or GM or anything like that, are bad people or did a bad job. But I think you needed something truly special to turn that into a positive situation, given, the pretense of what they were supposed to be and what they ended up being, and how bad things got.
I also think that it's an interesting situation because, like you said, you guys were looking at coming talent, they were looking at established talent. It is, in my experience, very rare for the players that exist in the first couple of years of a game to be the long-term stars of a game. Usually it takes a couple of years for real players to emerge, and especially because Overwatch League didn't have the structure of we didn't have the Overwatch League. Overwatch was, these tournaments that were happening mostly in Korea or contenders. And so to get the players who are resilient enough to go through this very intense professional league system is tough. So it was, I think, unlikely that a lot of the star players that we had in the early days of Overwatch were going to be able to cut it a couple years later. Which is true of almost any esport scene ever.
Especially if you throw in that, obviously, in the 6 months before Overwatch League began, it was basically a non-existent LAN scene. So even some of the players at that point in time could have been coasting on their rep before and just playing online games from home and still looking good enough. Whereas, some of these people, if they'd have played 2 or 3 lands before, maybe we would have seen there was issues. Because I agree with kind of what Hock was saying before. Like, if you look at coming into the Overwatch League, it was so hard to value players. Like, if I was picking Western players, to touch on what you said before, Hock, if I was telling some owner of a team, and he says, like, I'm not just going to get a whole Korean team, I'm going to buy some Western players as well, I would have told him, Sureforce should probably be one at the top of your list. If you've got a lot of money to spend, he should be like a big buy. No one knows now if that would have been the right move to bet your franchise on that or not, depending on what happens. So in the early days, at least, it's hard to know it's hard to blame people, but at the same time, I don't really know there was a path in that sense, right? Everyone's gambling to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why, we took that approach of being very thorough with our trials and, putting everyone to the test. And that's never going to be a perfect system either, right? If you put 6 variables on one side and 6 variables on the other side, it's still not the perfect scientific experience, but you keep doing that, you kind of get at least a better sense. And that's, more credit to Sureforce, where he kind of went down that slump and he pulled it back. And maybe some of these old envious players can do that as well. Maybe they can't, but I think it rings true that esports in its current day and age, you kind of do get that like first wave of pros, and then there are a select few that will stick with it and still be good, right? And if you can do so, you get all the fame and glory, right? Because you got that old reputation, that old fan base, you get that legendary status. But it's a hard thing to keep, and I think a lot of it comes down to ego, personality, drive. Where do you see yourself? And you can combat those things.
Those first players have the talent, right? They're the natural talents that can pick up on the game very quickly. But that will be eclipsed by people who are coachable in a structure or who are going to work harder in the long haul.
Yes, 100%. And like I said, it's hard. It would have been hard, to put any or all of that blame all on one person or the players or the staff or anyone, right? I think it was the perfect bad storm that just wrong place, wrong time, and they had a lot of issues and they did not turn that ship around quick enough. And I think, year 2, looking at that roster, I think they got to make significant changes. But for right now, they can just, I agree with their approach right now that it seems like they're trying to take a step back and let's turn this more into a positive experience first and foremost, and then let's try to work through issues. I don't know exactly who they're looking at for a head coach, but I think it's definitely someone that needs to take the reins. And no matter what, they did need a change, right? I don't think you can keep Kai there. And that's just the downside of being a head coach, right? If you're a head coach, even in traditional sports, it's not always their fault that something goes wrong, right? But if you have 1 or 2 star players and the team dynamics not working out, they've lost respect and trust, or if they're not receptive anymore to improving, you need somebody that's going to kind of be that refresh button, that change of pace. And that's unfortunate, but at least from what rumors say, hopefully Kai can find a new team, a new home where he's going to do well.
Right, so here's the thing, okay, one of the teams we talked about already, very briefly though, was London Spitfire. Now, if I told you this, Monty, if I told you that in Stage 3, Seoul Dynasty's not going to do that well, they're going to be at 3-3, you'd be like, fuck, well, I hope for better. If I said, oh, don't worry, London Spitfire's below them. They've won 2-4. What's going on, Monty? This is a team where some people, low-key, were trying to still harbour that thought that they were secretly the best team.
I mean, the thing about London that's so scary is that when they are playing well, they are the best team. That's like they are incredibly inconsistent. I think they do have the highest ceiling. I also think that Birdring apparently has a wrist injury right now, which is causing him not to be able to play this week, which is problematic because in theory, he and Prophet should be the best DPS duo in the league. And Prophet's been playing super well recently, like really, really well. But I honestly think this is like a coaching issue. So a lot of the problems with London have not been resolved, which is that they don't seem to have a stable core roster of players. The switching of their support players from the outside feels really arbitrary. They still struggle. So like, for example, in your match actually against Boston when they were playing Junkertown against you and they kept running that Sombra strat on attack. I don't understand why when London starts with a strat in a game, they refuse to change it, even if it is clearly not working. Like, they don't make in-game adjustments, and that's not even on the coaches. That's on the players for just like, they will blindly run a strategy whether it works or not. And with London, sometimes this results in them just spectacularly stomping people and 4-0ing if their opponents don't adapt. But if their opponents do adapt, then they will just keep running into that wall over and over and over again. And that is very strange to me, that they lack any kind of in-game flexibility.
Yeah, and I mean, didn't they just announce, what was it, Agape?
Agape, yeah.
Agape coming over. It's weird. I mean, you look at, they let go of Bishop, right? I mean, at least from my heard, I don't want to, throw salt on a wound or anything. I never thought he was like a strategy coach, right? It was more, I would say, of an ops coach, manager coach.
As far as I know.
Yeah, like, I don't think he was very directly involved with strategy or what they did on a day-to-day basis from a coaching perspective. I think he was more a manager for them. So I think adding a coach hopefully will help them. But I agree that when you look at that lineup, Badosin is probably the second best Zenyatta in the league, maybe. Then you have Birdwing and Prophet, who are absolutely insane.
They have Gesture.
Yeah, like they have the players to be good. They've obviously gone through something. Like, it seems no matter what team we talk about, it's like, yeah, they have the players that can be really good. Maybe they're having internal issues. These decisions are questionable. And when you look at something like the Dallas Fuel and you say, like, okay, we know that they're having issues. We know that they have players that can put them at a decent placing in the league, but they're not there. You kind of put two and two together. And with a lot of these teams, it's just, if you don't have the right mindset, if you don't have the right drive, if you don't have the right team culture, if you don't have the staff in place to kind of enforce decisions and pick the right direction, you run into problems. I think this stage for London was a one-off. I think they're going to be a lot better in stage 4. I think a lot of teams, a lot of the teams that have the good roster, skill and talent-wise, are going to pull it together for stage 4, because that's going to be clinch time, right? You need to make the playoffs. Everyone's going to say, all right, I might not agree with you.
Put their
I might
bullshit behind them.
Yeah. Like, we need to make playoffs. We may not make playoffs, so we need to like really do well here. People are going to start picking it back up. I think the season's just long, right? People are getting worn out. Tensions are high in teams. They're going through issues. But I think London will be just fine by the end of the year.
What about this though, Huck? Yeah, you said basically when we were talking earlier on about like substitutions, like, yeah, generally your team has the starters, they run those. That you're not a team like, for example, Philadelphia. When we had Beezy on, he was saying that he actually thinks that like his philosophy is everyone who's a support, or rather a sub, should get to play in some context in a scrim, so that the idea is they can still be inserted easily into the lineup, or if they prove their form, they can actually win the starting spot, whatever ideal he had.
Sure.
But your team's not doing that generally. And then when you look at these two big name Korean teams, as we've said, New York Excel is playing people, for example, in playing Pine all the time, that at least the theory is probably they won't do this very much. And in the playoffs, this won't be what they'll run. You have London, who seemingly just cycle 9 or 10 players every single match they play. You've played against them as well. Is there a concern, or what do you think about the difference in philosophy, that if your team keeps the same approach, and you said, generally your team's not like scouting one specific strategy against an opponent, you come to the playoffs and to some degree you're a known quantity, whereas you maybe haven't played against the New York Excelsior that will show up in the playoffs, or the London Spitfire you might have to play. What do you think of this?
Well, I think there's two ideals there that I agree with. First and foremost, the ideal situation for players and for a staff perspective is that you have two 6-man squads that can constantly play and constantly practice and live in harmony, and everyone can grow and prosper as a player. Realistically, from a business standpoint, as well as from a I have 10 players at the beginning of next season, let's say, as an example. I want to leave 2 spots open so I can pick up 2 new players if I have to, because I'm not sure how these other players will pan out. So although it's ideal to have a 12-man roster, from a business perspective, as well as from like a roster building perspective and what I need, it is not ideal. But I wish it could be like that, and maybe we can figure out how to do that with the league down the road, whatever it may be, we'll see. On the other hand, ideally you have 6 players that are very skilled, very flexible, and that's all you need. And they can play everything you need, right? On any given patch, any given map pool, they will be able to adapt and play the heroes you need, right? And, not to keep bringing up the past, but Dream was that guy for us, right? He added a lot of flexibility where he could play almost anything. So we didn't necessarily need that other DPS player to play Pharah, because we could have a Pharah, Genji, Widow, Roadhog, Diva, Zarya, whatever it might be. For us, we don't necessarily have that with Mistakes right now. Will we have that by the end of the year? Unsure, but realistically, we don't have their DPS player now, right? And that's kind of just how things played out with the trade deadline and what occurred. So we have to make the best of the situation. Now, if I'm Philly or I'm LA Gladiators or the Korean teams or whatever, I think I would view it differently, right? I think on certain maps, Pharah is very good, and at least for us, Mistakes probably isn't a good enough Pharah where we would force him to play Pharah, and he's not a great Pharah compared to us forcing another non-optimal composition on a certain map, right? At the end of the day, you put your team in the best position to win a map. So I think for certain teams, it's fine. You will have that. But at the same time, if I get a sub sheet in between rounds and I know a certain player is coming in and they play Pharah and they're really good at Pharah, but they're only good at Pharah, we know they're running Pharah. So it's kind of a give and take. I don't think there's like a perfect system or a perfect way to do that. You basically work with what you have. And it's up to the coaching staff to kind of read into those things and understand, like, okay, if they play this guy, this is the comp they're probably going to run. How prepared are we for that? And how much practice have we done against that comp in the last week or two? One of the scariest things from a coaching staff perspective for everyone in the league is when you get hit with a curveball, right? And you're in the dugout and you're looking at the loading screen and you prepared for X and they're coming out with Y and you haven't practiced Y in 2 or 3 weeks. And then you're like, oh my God, like we're not prepared for this. At least that's the way it is for us. So I think, it would be nice even for us to have that flexibility right now and have the option at least to put in that player. We're hoping that Mistakes is going to be that for us in time by the end of the year. Might be the case, might not be the case. We'll have to see.
Okay. What do you think about Monty? What's the current status of the Houston Outlaws? Obviously, they didn't have the toughest schedule this week, but they were on a losing streak before that. What do you think of them currently?
I mean, I think they're doing better than they were in stage 2. I think a lot of that has to do with the map pool. I think they would be doing better if Linkser wasn't slumping more or less. I think this stage, I think he hasn't been as good as he was in the past, but the rest of the team has stepped up. I like the fact that they're using Fact Fiction because they're actually showing a lot more presence in the dive. So like their ability to dive has gone way up. And I also think that their Tracer play is looking better. And I'm not sure if Linkser's looking worse on Widow because he's been playing more Tracer, but his Widow hasn't been as dominant. Jake's also looking better at Tracer. So I feel like the Outlaws, they traded in some ways Linkser's dominant Widow performance for better performance on Tracer and more strategic versatility, but it's sort of gone to a net
weird
0.
Yeah. And that's always the case with some players, right? Some players, they need to grind out heroes, and they're only going to have 2 or 3 in their pool that they can play well. And there's certain guys that can play 6 heroes really well, and they can adapt and change, and it's not a big deal for them. But I generally think that's accurate. I think Linkser's, he's an amazing talent. I put him up there for Western DPS, best in the season so far. But I think Widow, I think the skill set to be good at Widow and Genji and Tracer are very, very, very different. And it's hard to put a player in that position to be able to play those 3 heroes. So that's my opinion.
But yeah, I don't. I feel like they're just at a state of equilibrium where if they get the Houston Outlaws, if they get good at something else, then it costs them what they were good at already, which is a weird place to be in.
Did their new players come over yet? Arhan?
No, but I can't imagine how he would help them.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is Mendo. I'm not sure what's going on with him. I think he's a very skilled, talented player. But obviously, at this point, it's you're not counting on him to come in and be the saving grace of the team. It's kind of tough situation. Do you think that they should have picked up a Tracer, Monty?
Of course I do. They could have picked up Davin. They could have picked up Thene. Like,
they didn't need to. They on numerous occasions demeched someone. So I think it was Poco or something, right? So it's no problem. Wasn't necessary, Monty. I did not see all the demeckings.
Yeah, all the demeckings. I don't understand why you wouldn't pick up a Tracer player in this context. Like, I don't see a downside to it. If you don't need them because Link's or Jake improved, well, okay. But if you do need them, then why not just have them there?
Yeah. I mean, overall, they're a pretty good team. Where are they at in the standings? I don't even know.
They're 3-3.
No, and overall.
Oh, right. They're mid-table, I think. Yes, they are 7th.
Yeah, I mean, realistically,
Probably
everything.
middle.
Yeah, everything from like 2nd to basically 8th. Any of those teams could make it. I think Houston. They're a pretty big patch team too. And I don't like to put that label on anyone, but depending on the map pool,
I do, and
patch,
I did say they were a patch team.
yeah. And I don't think it's like a negative or as negative as they should take it. It's just kind of you have certain strengths, right? If you can get Jake on Junkrat on the maps that Junkrat is good on, he's going to play well, and he's going to kind of compensate for a lot of the negative sides of that roster and kind of what's missing. But they definitely need to play to their strengths, and like we were discussing earlier, they're a team that I think strategically is a little bit lacking, or at least you end up trading things like you say, and then you're kind of at this like equilibrium if you can't play to your strengths. So they need a good map pool. They need a good patch, and then maybe they can pull it together. But who knows? Next stage, right?
Okay. What do you think of the Florida Mayhem, or as I call them, what can Sire player do today? That's what my secret name for them.
I mean, I think they're a lot stronger now, right? With him in, he's an incredible Widow. Some people are putting him as like maybe a top 2-3 Widow in the league. Some are even saying 1. I think Fleta is still.
By the way, he is the best counter sniping Widow in the league right now. Statistically, in terms of Widow final blows to be receiving Widow final blows, so just in the Widow on Widow matchup, he's like 2.6, which means that he gets 2.6 Widow kills for every time a Widow kills him, which is very impressive.
Yeah.
What sort of mad stat is that? Like, and the winner of the Enemy at the Gates award for counter sniping is.
It's a cool stat. I like it.
It's interesting, but it's so.
It's a sniper duel stat.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's even more impressive because obviously his team overall hasn't been amazing,
Yes.
right? So he, from a player that's coming in mid-season, that's the best you can hope for.
Yeah,
Is
he's
you
also
come
just
in,
hit the ground running immediately.
exactly. You come in and you make the difference, and your team is like objectively much better with you on that roster. That puts a lot of value on him, and it says a lot about where he is as a player. I personally thought they were going to have more issues. I don't think it's easy to have a full Western team and then just be like, and here are 2 Koreans mid-season, go get them. But apparently, whatever it is, it worked for them. So I think they've done a pretty good job integrating them. Obviously, the season's probably, end of year, they're not making playoffs. But right now, I feel like they're a scary team. They took us to Game 5. What can you say, right?
That's the problem, though, is they are at that status where, at this point in time, no one expects them to win the games. But if they just have a close game, it's like, well, you're doing well. It's close.
There's also the factor that Florida, at the start of this stage, their first 2 weeks were New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and London.
Oh, boo-hoo. Yeah, when no one's good yet. It's the beginning of the season. So that should be when you want to play the match you want to.
No. I'm saying this stage.
Oh, this stage. Fair enough.
Like, so after they got Saya player, these were their first 4 opponents.
Sure.
Like, they're definitely going to do better as the stage goes on. Sure, they've only beaten Shanghai, but their next match was Houston. So from this point forward, they have Fuel, Valiant, Gladiators and who's their last one? San Francisco.
Shock or something.
Yeah, so they have a much better chance to end this stage with a better record than they have right now because all of their tougher matches were.
Yeah.
The problem is though, for that, they're one of the teams where I actually wonder what kind of the point is, like how you even get up in the morning, because they basically can't make the playoffs. Like that's done already. Like it's impossible. Then you add in like they had this core of players, a bunch of them had played together before, and then as an emergency basically move that they had to do, they had to throw these Koreans in. It's worked, but sort of like it hasn't instantly made them a really good team, but they're not the worst team anymore. But also so many other teams have improved that they still are kind of one of the worst teams. And then you add in that when the Overwatch league ends for season 1, there's a massive time period till season 2, it would appear. And then what do you do in that time period? Like, stick with this lineup? Do you have to just reformulate the whole squad? Are we really going to inject loads of money when it went so badly? Like, I feel like they're a team that's in one of the worst spots. There's nowhere, I don't see where you go at this point in time.
Yeah. I mean, I think them, obviously Shanghai, Fuel, you have to make a significant change no matter what way you look at it. I don't imagine the majority of that roster to be around for season 2. Even if you, I mean, from my perspective, even if you have to gamble a little bit and you got to pull up some younger, more unproven players from even contenders, you need a significant enough change, right? So if I'm even a player on that roster, I show up every day and I work my ass off, hopefully, to be one of those players, the veterans that stick around and kind of school the next generation and prove myself year 2. But yeah, any way you look at it, those bottom 3-4 teams, I wouldn't include San Francisco Shock there, but Shanghai, Mayhem, and Dallas, I think by next season, at least if I was in charge, I would revamp that team significantly, and I think it needs to be done for multiple reasons. But any way you look at it, you need a big change.
Maybe one day there'll be like that reality show where they would come in and they would take like a poor family where, like, you know, there'd been like the house had crashed in from a rainstorm or something, and then I can't remember what the name of the guy is because it's an American show, but they bring that guy in and they like revamp the whole place and give you like the dream house, and he like maybe that's what in like 10 years you'll be brought into teams, you'll revamp the whole team, you'll go, look at this roster I've given you this Korean player, oh yeah, all the kids say, yeah, we've got Korean players, we're not going to lose every game anymore. Could be the future. Yeah,
maybe. I mean, I hope we can still keep a healthy mix with teams. I would hate for our scene to end up kind of like League of Legends, where it's just like, who can bring the best Koreans? Who can get, you know, the guy that's has the regional NA status? You say that though,
Huck, but the problem is, if you look at the Overwatch League already, most people's solutions to their teams being bad is add in really good Korean players, and it's worked. Isn't that a problem?
Also, even all Houston, your best players are Korean players. I'm just going to point that out.
Well, it is now. Took care of that problem.
Took care of that. You took care
Don't
of that
say
problem.
anything. Don't say anything. Only I am allowed to make such jokes.
So, I mean, despite the player we had lost, I think our Western players are still good.
Their note is actually surprisingly good.
Thanks. Nepotism. There you go.
Oh yeah, I forgot that charge that was levied against you from having the Toronto esports thing.
Look at Toronto esports now too.
How is that even a thing, by the way? Nepotism. You're literally, so you were a coach on a different team, you identified a talent and you wanted to keep working with that talent. How the fuck is that nepotism? You were the coach of both teams. Like,
that's the way
it doesn't make any sense.
It's the way it is. I don't know. I think there's still the biggest thing, and I mean, this is like the age-old question, right? The $1 million question in esports is like, why is Korea so much better than other regions, specifically the West? And I think it's a very, very, very complicated question. And I think there's a lot of, you know, obviously there's the culture side of it, but at the end of the day, I mean, you just need driven players that are going to work hard. And I think that's harder for Western players because there's just a bigger cushion for them at the end of the day, right? If you're a Western player and things don't work out for you, even some of our Western players, you look at it and you think like, oh, they could go back to school, they could go live with their parents, you know, they could work a normal job, you know, whatever it might be. You look at a Korean player, they have this like doomsday clock over their head as far as like, when do I have to go to the military? And then they have this extremely
Can
competitive
I avoid
society.
going to the military?
Yeah, even that. And then you have this like extremely competitive school system where everyone's very educated, and it is really, really hard to get a good job unless you go to one of these schools. And it's like,
You know the
do
best
I
thing
wanna-
about that. Actually, I've got a little tangent. I don't want to destroy the point,
No,
but
go
I'll
ahead.
actually, just to give people context on how bad that is in Korea. Okay, so people might know a commentator who's well known in the Western scene is Chobra, right? And he was someone who did League of Legends. He's been
Yep.
around esports a number of years. Even I don't know if he still does, but I think he works for ESL, right? Does he still?
He still works for
Monty?
ESL, yes.
Okay, so basically, he's one of those people who has like proper shared heritage. Like he spent time living in Korea. He's also spent time living in the West. Now, do you know what university did he go to in the West, Monty? Wasn't it something really good like Princeton or something really?
Columbia.
Columbia. Okay, so he went to a pretty good university.
Ivy League school, yes.
When
very
he
good.
goes, he told me a story. I think it was in my Reflections interview with him, or Grilled, or whatever it was. I believe he told this story on camera, that when he would go back to Korea, his family at like family gatherings would talk about him as if he was like sort of like not doing that well. And he'd be like, no, what do you mean? I'm at Columbia. It's a good university. And they'd go, yeah, but it's not Seoul University, is it? It's like to them, like you could only, like that stereotype's not made up. That's real. Like they are so demanding. It's unreal. So there you go. There's the best example you want. If it's not Seoul University,
I mean, we can focus on this on esports too, but if you actually look at, for example, South Korea's like Summer Olympics results, it's a country of 50 million people, and they are dominating sports like archery and sharpshooting, and they're getting way too many medals for their population. You know what I mean? So they're like Koreans have been great athletes, you know, for like in terms of Olympic results. There's something about the culture that really does create very focused competitors.
And if you're a pro gamer, you have the military, you have the family expectation. It's like, if you're really going to do this pro gaming thing, you better be successful. If you're successful, you always hear these interviews with the pro players, even on the Western side, where like, what did your parents think? And they're like, well, they didn't really approve of it until I was successful. And then they were like, that's great. You know, once the money starts rolling in, the fame, everything that comes with it, that's when people are like, you know, good, I'm glad you went down that path. But until then, you know, your back's up against the wall. But I think for Koreans specifically, they have a lot more pressure on them to succeed, right? And they have a lot more benefits even from a fan perspective. You look at, you know, how crazy it is over there with the Korean fandom, and obviously the West is starting to catch up and everything, but you know, you just have a bigger upside, and you have a way steeper downside if it doesn't work out. So they're way more motivated to make this pro gaming thing work.
Well, also they're also like, in terms of their schooling and in terms of their lives, like practice is ingrained in them from a very young age, and they're like Koreans. A lot of Western players will be allergic to repetitive practice because they find it boring, but Koreans will just practice forever,
grind it out. Yeah. And I think there's like, you know, from my standpoint, if I'm, you know, I am looking to build something long term in a process and a program, there are the good and bad sides to that. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's also the dark side of it, which is that sometimes the practice is not very efficient in what they're doing, or it's lacking in terms of review or critical thinking, which can happen from time to time. So there's two sides to the coin, but right now in the vacuum, because you have to understand, esports is still very young. Nobody's actually figured out a great system for how to run a team in esports. It's not at the level of professional sports. Okay. Point to yourself. Calm down there. Keep posting.
Just kidding.
No, you're not. We all know you're not actually kidding, but you're doing a great job, so I can't argue with you.
I don't know what you're talking about, Monty. He hasn't even made a stage playoff yet. Show me something. Anyone can win regular season games. I mean, obviously, Dallas Fuel and Shanghai Dragons are like, hey, calm down. That's not true.
We still have a lot of work to do.
But the point is like, nobody's actually figured that out. So the thing is that in the absence of a truly good system, the insane practicing is the best thing.
Yes, I agree. And I think we'll get there in time, right? And I think Western players can work in that, and I think Korean players can work in that. But you got to create that system, and the player, more than anything, you got to have the players that are willing to buy into it, right? Because everyone's going to come with like what they think is best, and until you can get a player to buy in and believe and, you know, trust that you know what's best for them, even from our perspective, you know, we'll have like an outing as a team, or we do recess where we go to like the park outside in between matches. We take an hour break, and certain players will be like, I want to practice, or certain players will be like, I don't want to practice, or I don't want to go outside, or I don't want to go to this team outing. You have to explain it to them and why it's important and why they need to do it. And once you do that enough times, whether it's something strategy, or it's some kind of cultural thing, or it's just a general health and fitness thing, they start to trust and respect and believe, and you kind of get them to buy in.
One of the things that I've long said about why Koreans are so far ahead is that they have these former pro players that are now coaching these teams in Korea. Like, you have the Brood War legends who run League of Legends team now, or what have you. And because even though they may not have specific strategic information about the games at hand, they do know how to deal with pro players, how to make an efficient practice schedule, how to have productive interpersonal communications between their players. And these are all valuable skills. And I've said many times, this is one thing that the West lacks, because we literally don't have these people. And you yourself, as a championship level former pro gamer, are the first wave in the West of people like you who have now taken up the reins in terms of team management. Right. We really haven't had. So in Korea, they've had people like you for years.
Yes.
Only now in the West are we starting to have people like you in esports management, which I think is a huge difference. And I'm sure your players, you understand the pro player condition because you were there and you lived that life. And so I'm sure they respect you more, and I'm sure you have more credibility with them based on your history and your results.
Yes, 100%. And I think that is a big factor of getting people to buy it and have that. I never thought about that. That's actually very interesting, and I think hopefully we'll catch up from a Western perspective as far as at least coaching and getting those processes set up. I mean, it's really.
You look at League of Legends. Like, Reach was a major coach. I Love Uv is currently the head coach of the Africa Freaks. Like, I mean, Boxer was in Telecom for a while. Like, these are all like the Brood War legends for the most part transition into management.
Even there was the LW owner / coach was a StarCraft 1 pro player. I can't remember what his ID is, but he wore his headphones on the outside in a match, and he got a nickname from it. I really can't remember. I don't. There's going to be some Brood War elitist that's going to know this. And then there's the Kongdu's owner was also a StarCraft pro, who I think was the first person to do Mutalisk stacking. I know MC now is
even MC became like
coaching.
A league coach.
He's coaching Kongdu. I think they actually just got relegated. So rip MC. I watched the game, but yeah, I mean, StarCraft kind of especially has that like weird special dynamic where a lot of the ex-pro players have ended up somewhere else in a like coaching managerial position, and I hope that that will kind of keep going.
I have a question that ties into this though, because actually when Monty was saying there that like this is an element that's like coming forwards, and funnily enough, by the way, as a random side point for people who haven't been following League of Legends this year, actually I Love Uv is actually bringing strategical components to League of Legends, because that Africa Freaks team that he currently coaches, last year they had a star player who like basically like warped the whole landscape of how the game was played, so they just played through that guy all the time. And when they lost him this year, actually he has had games where he basically did like that StarCraft move where you specifically plan to snipe a certain opponent in a certain way, and they had certain comps that they ran that other people didn't run, and he ran them specifically when he knew an opponent would do something, which is literally the old pro league way of how you used to coach in StarCraft, actually, where you're playing a better opponent, but if you have this one player in your team that can play one particular style on one map, you just tell that guy, practice this one map and I'm going to bring you out, and the other guy won't know who's going to play him, but you're going to play him because he's the star player, and if you can get this one little upset collectively over the match, that's how we grind out a win over a team that's actually better. But the question I wanted to allude to here was, I've noticed actually that one thing that has kind of low-key been Korean creep is a lot of these teams have now added at least one Korean coach. Most teams have some form of Korean coach on the bench. So I want to ask you particularly, because despite all the great things we've just said about Korean coaches, you were in a position yourself when you were playing with Evil Geniuses in StarCraft, where you went over to Korea, you played in the Pro League, your team was doing really badly, and famously, Alex Garfield was able to convince that guy, Coach Park, who at the time was the most legendary Brood War coach, because he'd won like all these championships with SK Telecom, and he was brought into your team, where your team had a lot of big names, but you didn't have a lot of kind of the bench players that I'm talking about. And to some degree, he turned it around, obviously going from 0 wins in matches to winning some. Well, the question I had for you is, what's your particular take on that? Because I noticed you didn't have any Korean coaches there, not even one. So is it something, do you think in general, like the culture difference for Westerners is going to be too much? What's your take on it?
Well, I mean, I'll address it in multiple points, but the Overwatch League perspective is, I feel like if you're always going to have Korean players, you need a Korean coach to a certain degree, or at least like a very good translator. From the EG days, I mean, I never really had that much coaching, to be completely frank. Like, I did not stay in the like TL EG house with Coach Park and the rest of those players like Hero and J-Dog that long. And that was more, I guess, me of being a diva than anything else. I really like staying with OGS. I'd been with OGS. That's where I was comfortable. I stayed with OGS. Insights into like the coaching from Coach Park. I think he was a good leader. He was a really good motivator. And that was the number one factor back then. I don't think there was a lot of strategy coaching, at least that he did, but with a lot of those guys and a lot of the players nowadays, that's the majority of the coaching that's actually needed, is having someone that's going to push you and make sure that you're driven to do better. I think the overall like Korean coaching / culture, it's, even when we talk now and we talk about like a lot of internal issues, player-centric egos, Jonak syndrome, all these things, and how like I think the best structure is always to have a top-down structure. In the Korean culture, you kind of have that ingrained just based on age, right? Not only age, but like the respect that comes with the work that they've done previously. So Coach Park, like you said, he's a legendary coach. As soon as he walks into a room, even if it's a new team and he's hired for that project or that event, or even just taking over another team like EGTL, he has that respect, not only based on what he's done, but on his age and how you interact on a day-to-day basis. I don't know how many viewers will know that, but basically in Korean, you have any given thing that you say, you have basically 2 ways to say it. It's hard to explain, but it'd be kind of similar to like if I wanted to say, "Hey, Monty, what's up?" Instead of saying that, it'd be like, "Hey, Monty, sir, how are you doing today, sir?"
Which is like how he'd like you to refer to him for the rest of the show.
Yeah. So they kind of, you naturally have, some respect, some team culture that's automatically ingrained in. I mean, even looking back at that, I remember when they had like TL power rankings going into the Pro League, and we had all these star players, and we were very similar to some teams in Overwatch League. We were ranked the top team going into Pro League because we had all these great players, and then we were shit. Yeah, we were so bad.
It was such a hype moment too, because it was time like a team had been in Pro League.
It was amazing, and then it was horrible. So you learn from history, and we have another couple examples of that in Overwatch League. Maybe the next one somebody will change that perception, but we'll have to see.
Okay. Because I actually thought the point you made there was an interesting one as well, that like to some degree you do sort of need at least a Korean coach if you have Korean players, right? Because if you look at a lot of the interviews and statements that we've seen from Korean players, this is another area that gets lost on Westerners, is that, listen, obviously no one is cool with actually losing games, but there are people who can lose games who are Western players who are like, that's okay, they were the number 1 team this week, or, we did well in the game. If you look at the Korean players who are on the bad teams, it's depressing as fuck reading their interviews. They're like apologizing all the time, like, I'm doing so badly. Every single FX thing is like, he sounds like he's on suicide watch. It's so bad when you read the comments. So
he was complaining about he was running away from in his head yesterday, like,
even in his dreams, right? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for someone that's like lived with Koreans in Korea and talked to them, and I obviously have had a good amount of close Korean friends. I think a lot of it is just like fake PR. I think a lot of the Western players are a lot more realer, quote unquote. And I almost view Korean players as like it's almost like they're more corporate or political. They really think about like, if I say this, how is it going to be viewed? And it's almost always better to be viewed in like you're a humble, hardworking person, and you want to be the best, and you're going to keep doing that and working hard until you can be the best. I think once you get down to it and you talk to Korean players on like a day-to-day basis, you interact with them, you'll see that a lot of them do have very similar or bigger personalities than the West, and they do trash talk and joke and, are a little bit more obscene. That's normal, right? And I think you see that in the Korean players, even in esports that are more westernized or have been on Western teams or learned to speak more English and therefore pandering more to the Western fans. You see their personalities come out more. You see more of that color. You see them, acting out more, which is good. And I like that, because I don't like the like bland, like, oh, I'm sorry for the loss today. I'll work harder and we'll be better later. But that's the way it is.
You see, Monty, in Korea, there can actually be a more strict and more widespread backlash against statements that people make.